Across the far corners of our planet lie places so remote, so unreachable, that almost no human eyes have ever seen them. From snow-choked valleys buried beneath the Antarctic ice to islands lost in fog at the edge of forgotten oceans. These are the last true frontiers of Earth, places where nature remains untamed, untouched, and almost entirely unknown. Some hold secrets locked away for millions of years beneath rock, ice, and sea. Others sit unknown on the map, guarded by distance, danger, or the sheer impossibility of getting there. From forgotten outposts and buried valleys to landscapes so remote they've barely been mapped, tonight we're venturing to the most isolated and inaccessible places on Earth. So grab a snack, get comfortable, and let the outside world fade away for a while, and join us as we travel to the quiet edges of the planet where nature still rules and humanity feels very far away. Along Namibia's western edge, the desert meets the sea in one of the strangest, most unforgiving landscapes on Earth, the Skeleton Coast. It stretches for 300 miles, a narrow, shifting boundary between the Atlantic and the world's oldest desert. From the air, it looks like another planet, sand dunes the size of mountains rolling straight into the surf, mist crawling inland from the ocean, and the bones of ships scattered along the shore like fossils. For centuries, sailors feared this place more than any other coastline in Africa. The cold, Benguela Current collides with desert winds to create thick fog that can hide entire ships until they run aground. Once stranded, there was no escape. The nearest settlements were hundreds of miles inland, across dunes so dry that even scavengers struggled to survive. Many wrecked sailors made it to shore only to die of thirst within sight of the ocean. Their rusting hulls and wooden skeletons still dot the sand, hundreds of them, some dating back to the 1800s. The coast's name came naturally. Portuguese sailors called it As Areias do Inferno, the sands of hell. In the early 20th century, explorers and traders who tried to cross it told stories of days without water, heat so fierce that metal warped, and nights filled with the sound of waves breaking against the desert wind. When Namibian bush pilot Eddie Auer flew over it in the 1930s, he described it as the land God made in anger. The interior is even harsher. The Namib Desert is ancient, at least 55 million years old, and among the driest places on Earth. Rain may not fall for decades at a time. The dunes, sculpted by wind, shift constantly, reshaping the horizon. In places, they glow red from oxidized iron, creating an alien palette of rust and gold under the sun. Despite this, life clings to existence. Beetles harvest moisture from fog by tilting their bodies toward the wind. Desert elephants roam the riverbeds after rare storms. Even lions once adapted to hunt seals along the coast, a strange inversion of the natural order. For most of history, this strip of land remained unexplored. The inland route from the nearest settlements in Damaraland and Kaokoland was blocked by endless dunes and canyons carved by rivers that rarely flow. In the early 1900s, German surveyors tried to map it, but many expeditions never returned. The most famous attempt came in 1942, when a British cargo ship called Dunedin Star ran aground here. More than 100 passengers were stranded on the beach. Rescuers attempted to reach them from both land and sea. Aircraft dropped supplies, trucks tried to cross the desert, and a rescue ship itself became trapped. After weeks of effort, most of the survivors were rescued, but 2 rescuers and several crew members died in the attempt. The event cemented the Skeleton Coast's reputation as one of the world's deadliest frontiers. Yet for all its hostility, there's beauty here. The fog that once doomed sailors now sustains life. It rolls in every morning, drawn inland by the cold ocean currents. The mist catches on dunes and rocks, feeding lichens and tiny shrubs that turn the desert shades of gray and green. Inland, the dry riverbeds are lined with acacia trees and low scrub, feeding herds of antelope and ostrich. When viewed at sunrise, with light cutting through the fog and catching the rusted remains of ships, the Skeleton Coast becomes something surreal, a quiet meeting of life, death, and time. Reaching it today is still an undertaking. There are no towns along most of the coast, only small outposts for scientists and park rangers. The Skeleton Coast National Park covers much of the region, restricting access to protect its fragile ecosystem. Visitors need permits, and only small aircraft or guided convoys are allowed to travel through. Flights from Swakopmund or Windhoek reveal endless sand dunes colliding with surf, the desert sliding directly into the Atlantic like a living tide. On the ground, the experience is otherworldly. No sound except the wind and waves, no roads, and no sign of civilization in any direction. Inland from the coast lies the Kunene region, a wilderness of canyons, gravel plains, and dry riverbeds stretching to the Angolan border. It's home to the Himba people, semi-nomadic herders who have lived here for centuries. Their villages stand as small islands of life in an ocean of desert. For them, the Skeleton Coast isn't a place of death, it's home. They navigate it by memory and instinct, finding water where others would see only dust. In recent years, a few adventurers have attempted to traverse the Skeleton Coast on foot or by vehicle, but success is rare. The shifting sands swallow tracks within minutes, and GPS signals often fail near the dunes. In 2011, South African explorer Kingsley Holgate described driving through it as like moving through a ghost world. Even the sky feels heavy here, a gray-white haze that softens every outline and makes distance impossible to judge. What draws people here, perhaps, is that it resists understanding. The rest of the world feels mapped and tamed, but the Skeleton Coast still behaves on its own terms. It's a place where time slows, where the boundary between land and sea blurs into fog, and where the remains of human ambition, rusted ships, crumbling vehicles, empty camps, are slowly reclaimed by sand. Further down the coastline, the world's extremes only grow more difficult to reach. The next stop takes us far south into the far reaches of the southern Indian Ocean, thousands of miles from the nearest continent. In the middle of the southern Indian Ocean lies a cluster of volcanic islands so remote that sailors once called them the Desolation Islands. The Kerguelen Archipelago sits more than 2,000 miles from the nearest inhabited landmass, far beyond the reach of regular shipping routes, invisible to all but passing satellites and wandering seabirds. It's a landscape shaped by wind and isolation, a place that feels almost outside of time. The main island, Grande Terre, is enormous, larger than some European countries, but almost entirely uninhabited. Black volcanic cliffs rise from the sea, streaked with snow and green moss. Inland, glaciers crawl between jagged peaks and valleys carved by ancient lava flows. The wind never really stops here. It howls off the ocean, carrying mist and salt so thick it coats the rocks in white. Temperatures rarely rise above freezing, and the sky seems permanently overcast. The sea that surrounds the islands is among the roughest in the world. Icy swells and constant gales that can sink small boats with ease. Reaching Kerguelen requires patience and luck. There are no airports and no regular ferries. The only access is by ship from Reunion Island, a French territory off the coast of Africa. A voyage of nearly 2 weeks across unpredictable waters. The French Navy maintains a small base and a scientific research station here, but even those who live there temporarily describe it as both beautiful and unsettling. Cargo ships arrive only a few times a year, bringing food, supplies, and mail. For most of the year, the scientists and engineers stationed there are completely cut off, surrounded by storms and endless gray water. Kerguelen's discovery came in 1772, when French navigator Yves Joseph de Kerguelen first sighted its coastline while searching for the fabled southern continent. He thought he had found it, a massive new land ripe for colonization. What he actually found was an archipelago of bare rock, wind, and cold, a place so barren that early explorers abandoned plans to settle almost immediately. British explorer James Cook later visited and confirmed the desolation, noting that not a shrub big enough to make a toothpick grows here. Despite its harshness, Kerguelen supports a surprising amount of life. The surrounding seas are rich with plankton and krill, feeding huge populations of seals, penguins, and seabirds. Elephant seals sprawl across the beaches in the thousands, while albatrosses nest on cliffs that drop straight into the ocean. On calm days, which are rare, the air fills with the sound of wind over wings and waves against rock. The interior plains, covered with hardy mosses and low tundra, are littered with reindeer, introduced by French scientists decades ago for food. They've since gone feral, thriving in the absence of predators. For researchers, Kerguelen is invaluable. Its remoteness makes it one of the best places on Earth to study the effects of isolation on ecosystems, weather patterns, and marine life. It's also a living record of Earth's volcanic history. The archipelago is part of the Kerguelen Plateau, a submerged continental fragment that once connected India, Australia, and Antarctica more than 100 million years ago. Scientists consider it a microcontinent, a remnant of a world that existed long before humans. The island's volcanic nature gives it a striking character. Steam still seeps from vents in some places, and the ground underfoot is fractured and uneven. The landscape feels unfinished, raw, and ancient. In winter, the winds are so strong that they can tear tents apart and overturn small vehicles. Even the base buildings are built low and heavy to withstand the gales. Outside, silence rarely exists. The air is always alive with the sound of movement, water, wind, and rock grinding under pressure. Few tourists ever visit. Those who do come often describe an odd sense of peace mixed with disorientation. There are no trees, no cities, and no visible landmarks except mountains and sea. The endless horizon and gray skies blur together until it's hard to tell where the ocean ends and the clouds begin. Days stretch long and monotonous, broken only by the arrival of seabirds or the flash of a whale's tail offshore. Kerguelen also holds remnants of human ambition. The ruins of old whaling stations still stand on the shore, rusting boilers and broken cabins overtaken by moss. In the mid-1900s, France briefly considered using the islands for military purposes, even launching experimental rockets here during the early years of its space program. The harsh environment eventually forced all but scientific operations to shut down. Today, the only permanent residents are the researchers at Port-au-Français, a small cluster of prefabricated buildings that house around 60 people in summer and fewer than half that in winter. The isolation can be as psychological as it is physical. Communication with the outside world depends on satellite signals that sometimes fail for days at a time. Storms can last weeks, trapping people indoors. When the supply ships are delayed, rationing becomes a part of daily life. But many who work there describe Kerguelen with a kind of admiration, a place that strips life down to essentials and demands respect from those who stay. At times, the fog lifts, revealing sweeping cliffs and ice fields under a pale sky. When that happens, the view is staggering, an empty horizon, untouched and infinite. The sea glitters silver, seals call from the shore, and the wind carries only the sound of waves. It's moments like these that remind visitors why the islands hold such fascination. They are one of the few places left on Earth where nature exists entirely on its own terms. Further north, however, lies a different kind of isolation, not volcanic or maritime, but frozen. A settlement at the top of the world where the temperature rarely rises above freezing, and the nearest neighbors are polar bears and snowdrifts. At the top of the world, where the map begins to fade into white, sits a small cluster of buildings known as Alert. This settlement in Nunavut, Canada, is the northernmost permanently inhabited place on Earth, only 500 miles from the North Pole. It's closer to Moscow than to Ottawa, and nearly as far from the nearest tree as it is from the rest of civilization. The land surrounding it is frozen for most of the year, a stark plateau of ice and rock where the horizon seems to go on forever. The temperature rarely climbs above freezing, and during the winter months, the sun disappears completely. Alert was established in the 1950s during the Cold War, chosen for its strategic location between the continents. Today, it serves as a Canadian military outpost and weather station, manned year-round by a rotating crew of a few dozen people. Their work involves monitoring the Arctic atmosphere, tracking climate data, and maintaining communication systems that connect the high Arctic to the rest of the world. It's a place built on endurance rather than comfort. Getting there isn't simple. There are no roads, and the nearest settlement, Resolute Bay, is more than 400 miles away. The only way in is by plane, usually a military transport from southern Canada that can land only during clear weather. Even then, storms can ground flights for weeks at a time, leaving crews stranded until conditions improve. The airstrip, built on permafrost, constantly shifts and buckles with the freeze-thaw cycle, requiring constant maintenance just to stay usable. When the plane finally descends through the Arctic haze, Alert appears almost by surprise, a scattering of red and white buildings perched on the edge of an endless plain. Everything here feels temporary, as if it could disappear under the snow overnight. Inside, the air is warm and dry. Outside, it's an instant shock of cold that freezes exposed skin in seconds. The wind never stops. It hums around the metal structures, rattling doors and antennas, filling the air with a low, constant noise that becomes part of the background of life here. The landscape itself is almost otherworldly. The ground is a patchwork of snow, gravel, and ice, broken only by the occasional ridge of dark rock. In summer, the ice retreats enough to reveal a barren tundra dotted with pools of meltwater. Moss and lichen creep across the stones, the only hints of green in a world of white and gray. The Arctic Ocean is only a few miles to the north, frozen solid most of the year, its surface cracked by pressure ridges that groan and shift with the tide. During the long polar night, Alert is plunged into darkness for months. The only light comes from the stars, the occasional flicker of the aurora, and the faint glow from the outpost's windows. Inside, the crews mark time by their routines. Maintenance checks, research tasks, communal meals. They live by the clock, not the sun, adjusting their rhythms to the artificial world they've built within the cold. It's an existence defined by discipline and patience. Every person stationed here describes the same feeling, a kind of isolation that's hard to compare to anywhere else. The distance isn't just physical, it's mental. There's no internet for casual use, no cell service, no escape except the landscape itself. When weather closes in and the supply flights stop, the silence can stretch for days. Yet there's a strange comfort in the stillness. The cold air feels clean, the stars impossibly sharp. Many who serve here say the experience changes how they think about scale, both of the planet and of their own lives. In the brief Arctic summer, daylight returns for 24 hours a day. The sun circles the horizon but never sets. Temperatures climb into the low 30s, melting the ice enough for streams to form. Scientists arrive to study air patterns, snow composition, and climate data. Caribou and Arctic foxes pass through, and seabirds nest along the coast before migrating south again. The landscape, barren in winter, suddenly feels alive. But the illusion doesn't last long. By September, the winds strengthen, the cold returns, and the snow begins to fall again. For the military, Alert's value lies in its position, a listening post on the edge of the Arctic, part of a chain of weather and communication stations that track northern air traffic and monitor radio signals. For scientists, it's a barometer of global change. The air here is among the cleanest on Earth, making it ideal for tracking pollution that drifts from the industrialized south. Measurements taken in Alert help scientists understand how climate shifts ripple through the planet's atmosphere. Over the years, Alert has built a quiet mythology. Some call it the loneliest place in the world, others the most peaceful. There are stories of researchers watching the aurora for hours, of the horizon glowing blue at midday, of equipment freezing solid overnight. Few stay longer than 6 months, but many say the experience stays with them for life. The clarity of the air, the sense of scale, and the realization that there are still corners of the world where humanity is a guest. Yet even this northernmost settlement is not the final edge of the world. Across the polar sea lies another expanse of ice and rock, a chain of frozen islands that mark the boundary between the Arctic and the unknown. North of mainland Russia, scattered across the Arctic Ocean like shards of frozen stone, lies the Franz Josef Land Archipelago. It's a cluster of more than 190 islands, most of them covered in ice year-round, forming one of the northernmost landmasses on Earth. Even by Arctic standards, it's extreme. Locked in ice for 11 months of the year, swept by constant wind, and cut off from the world by a sea that almost never thaws. From above, it looks like a broken crown of glaciers and peaks jutting from an endless white sea. The water between them is a shifting mosaic of pack ice and leads, open cracks that appear and close with the tides. The air temperature rarely rises above freezing, even in summer, and for much of the year the region exists in darkness. It's a world of muted color, gray sky, black cliffs, and endless white. Franz Josef Land wasn't discovered until 1873, when an Austro-Hungarian expedition led by explorers Julius Payer and Karl Weiprecht stumbled across it while searching for the Northeast Passage. Their ship, the Tegethoff, had been trapped in the polar ice for months and drifted hundreds of miles north before the crew finally saw the first peaks rising out of the fog. They named the islands after Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria, mapped what they could, and left the rest to speculation. The journey nearly killed them, but their discovery placed a name on one of the last blank spots on Earth's map. Even today, reaching Franz Josef Land is a formidable challenge. The nearest inhabited settlement on the Russian archipelago of Novaya Zemlya lies more than 600 miles to the south. Travel is restricted to military or scientific expeditions, which arrive by icebreaker during the brief Arctic summer when the sea ice retreats just enough to allow passage. There are no ports, no airfields, and no permanent residents. A few small research bases and military outposts dot the archipelago, manned by rotating crews who study glacial movement, climate data, and Arctic wildlife. For most of the year, these outposts are isolated by weather, reachable only by helicopter when the sky is clear. The environment here is as hostile as it is fascinating. Ice caps dominate nearly every island, with cliffs of blue and white ice dropping straight into the ocean. Glaciers slide slowly into the sea, calving enormous blocks that drift south with the current. The ground beneath is a mixture of ancient volcanic rock and frozen tundra, littered with boulders carried by the ice. During the short summer, mosses and tiny flowers bloom briefly across patches of bare soil, turning the land a pale green before frost returns. The air smells of salt and cold metal. The silence is broken only by the grinding of ice or the calls of seabirds nesting on the cliffs. Despite its barrenness, life persists. Polar bears patrol the coastlines, seals haul out on the ice, and walruses crowd onto the beaches. The surrounding waters are among the richest feeding grounds in the Arctic, drawing whales, narwhals, and vast flocks of migratory birds. In 2016, Russia declared Franz Josef Land part of a massive nature reserve, the Russian Arctic National Park, to protect its fragile ecosystems and historical relics. Those relics tell stories of exploration and survival. The remains of 19th century expeditions still lie scattered across the islands. Rusted cans, sledges, wooden huts half buried in snow. In 1895, Norwegian explorer Fridtjof Nansen used the islands as a base during his attempt to reach the North Pole. He and his companion Hjalmar Johansen built a rough stone hut on one of the islands, living off polar bear meat and seal fat through the winter. They later described the isolation as total, the landscape without sound or shadow. Decades later, Soviet scientists rediscovered the hut. Its roof collapsed, but much of its contents preserved in the permafrost. The archipelago also played a strategic role during the Cold War. In the 1950s and 60s, Soviet aircraft used the area as a refueling and observation point for Arctic flights. Today, the Russian military maintains a small presence at Nagorskoye on Alexandra Land, one of the southernmost islands. It's the northernmost military base in the world. A handful of buildings painted in red, blue, and white, standing against a horizon of ice. For researchers, Franz Josef Land is one of the most valuable natural laboratories on the planet. The islands sit directly in the path of changing Arctic weather systems, making them ideal for studying climate shifts. Scientists record data on glacial melt, sea ice formation, and the migration patterns of Arctic wildlife. The rate of warming here is faster than almost anywhere else on Earth, a signal of the transformation happening across the polar regions. There's also an eerie quality to the place. When the sun dips below the horizon in late autumn, it doesn't rise again for 4 months. The landscape disappears into twilight, lit only by the northern lights and the faint reflection of moonlight on snow. In those months, the islands feel suspended in time, a frozen void stretching in every direction. Then, just as suddenly, summer returns. The ice softens, rivers form across the tundra, and the cliffs erupt with the noise of nesting birds. The contrast is so complete it feels like two worlds alternating in the same place. Few people have seen Franz Josef Land firsthand, and fewer still have explored it on foot. Most who visit are scientists, soldiers, or crew aboard nuclear icebreakers, ships powerful enough to carve a path through the frozen sea. Tourists are rare, though a few Arctic cruises pass nearby when the ice allows. Even then, the weather can change within minutes, forcing captains to turn back. There are no guarantees here. Everything depends on wind, temperature, and luck. Those who've reached the islands describe a landscape that defies familiarity. There are no landmarks except the ice itself, no scent except salt and frost, no color except variations of white, gray, and blue. Yet within that simplicity lies an overwhelming sense of scale, a reminder that the Arctic, despite centuries of exploration, still holds places beyond ordinary human reach. Further west, across the top of the world, another wilderness stretches deep into the heart of South America's green ocean. It's a place defined not by ice and silence, but by endless trees, a labyrinth so dense and uncharted that even satellites struggle to map it. Deep in the western Amazon, near the meeting point of Brazil, Peru, and Colombia, lies one of the most impenetrable places on Earth, the Javari Valley. Stretching for more than 30,000 square miles, it's one of the largest areas of unexplored rainforest left on the planet. Seen from above, it's a continuous canopy of green broken only by winding brown rivers. The air here is thick with humidity, the ground alive with insects, and beneath the trees, human footprints are almost non-existent. The Javari Valley is home to more uncontacted and isolated indigenous groups than anywhere else in the world. At least 16 tribes are believed to live here with no sustained contact with the outside world, their cultures preserved by distance and by choice. They move through the forest as their ancestors did for thousands of years, hunting, fishing, and shifting their villages with the seasons. The Brazilian government officially recognizes this territory as the Vale do Javari indigenous land, a protected area larger than Portugal, where outside access is strictly limited. Only authorized researchers and government monitors are allowed in, and even then, only along the edges. For most people, this is a place seen only on maps and satellite images. Reaching it is an ordeal. The nearest major city, Tabatinga, sits more than 500 miles upriver, accessible only by boat or small aircraft. From there, travelers spend days navigating a maze of rivers, the Itwi, Ittoqqortoormiit, and Javari, their brown waters winding endlessly through dense jungle. The canopy above often blocks out the sun, turning the waterways into narrow corridors of shadow. It's hot and wet, with air so heavy that every breath feels like drinking water. Mosquitoes swarm constantly, and sudden tropical downpours flood the forest floor without warning. The isolation of the Javari Valley is both geographical and deliberate. Brazil's National Indian Foundation, or FUNAI, enforces a policy of no contact to protect the indigenous groups from disease and exploitation. Even brief encounters can be catastrophic. Illnesses like influenza or measles can spread rapidly through communities with no immunity. Rangers stationed along the borders monitor the area using river patrols, small planes, and drones, documenting signs of movement without interfering. Occasionally, they find evidence of the tribe's presence, footprints along the banks, freshly cut trees, or abandoned huts woven from palm leaves. Despite these precautions, the valley has faced growing threats. Illegal loggers, miners, and poachers occasionally push into the edges of the territory, drawn by gold deposits and rare timber. In 2022, British journalist Dom Phillips and Brazilian expert Bruno Pereira were killed while investigating illegal activity in the region. Their deaths highlighted both the dangers of working in such a remote environment and the fragility of protecting a place so vast. Many areas of the Javari Valley remain unexplored even by Brazilian authorities. Helicopter surveys have revealed clearings that hint at unknown settlements, small signs of organized life in a wilderness that stretches beyond comprehension. The terrain is part of what makes the valley so unreachable. The Amazon here is at its most extreme. Rivers split and merge endlessly, forming a labyrinth of channels that can strand even experienced guides. The forest canopy is so thick that GPS signals often fail, and there are few open spaces large enough for aircraft to land. Heavy rains turn trails into rivers of mud, and fallen trees block paths faster than they can be cleared. There are no roads, no permanent outposts deep inside, and almost no points of reference. Those who venture in describe a sense of disorientation that goes beyond simple navigation. The forest closes around you until direction and distance lose meaning. Biologically, the Javari Valley is extraordinary. The region contains some of the richest biodiversity on Earth. Countless plant and animal species, many still unnamed. The rivers teem with fish and caimans, while the forests echo with the calls of howler monkeys and birds. Scientists believe that because so much of it remains untouched, it could hold unknown species of plants with potential medicinal value. Yet research here moves cautiously. The protection of the indigenous groups takes precedence over exploration, and large-scale expeditions are forbidden. In that sense, the valley remains a frontier, both ecologically and culturally. One of the last places on Earth where the ancient world and the modern one still exist side by side without overlap. The people who live along the perimeter of the Javari Valley, members of contacted tribes and government workers, describe a place that feels both vast and fragile. The boundaries are invisible on the ground, but strictly enforced. Patrol posts along the Ittoqqortoormiit River serve as watch points, where indigenous rangers and federal agents track incursions and document evidence of illegal activity. Supplies arrive by boat once a month, and communication with the outside world depends on satellite links. For those stationed there, life is a cycle of observation, repair, and waiting for the next flood, the next dry season, or the next message from the outside. Culturally, the valley represents one of the last refuges of human diversity. The tribes here, names like the Kurubo, Matis, and Mayaruna, maintain traditions that have disappeared elsewhere in the Amazon. Some use bows taller than themselves. Others paint their faces and bodies in elaborate patterns that symbolize family and spiritual ties. Their languages, customs, and stories are unlike any others, shaped entirely by the forest around them. Contact would almost certainly alter or erase them, which is why the preservation of their isolation is seen as essential. The air inside the valley carries a constant hum. Insects, distant thunder, the movement of unseen animals. During the rainy season, the rivers rise so high that trees appear to grow straight out of the water. The humidity never breaks. Even at night, the temperature hovers around 80 degrees. Fog gathers over the water at dawn, turning the forest into a sea of gray and green before the sun burns through. It's easy to see why myths about lost cities and hidden tribes have persisted here for centuries. Early explorers believed the region might conceal El Dorado, the legendary city of gold. Modern explorers know better, but the sense of mystery remains. Satellite imagery occasionally reveals new clearings, evidence that some tribes are moving deeper into the forest to escape encroachment. To the outside world, these images are tantalizing glimpses into a place that resists discovery. To the people who live there, they're signs of survival, proof that isolation can still protect. The Javari Valley is less a destination than a reminder of how large the Earth still is, how much remains beyond the reach of maps and roads. But as remote as this rainforest is, it's not the only landscape where nature and time seem to have conspired to keep the world out. Far to the north, across the heart of Asia, lies a place that tells a different story. Not of water and life, but of fire, stone, and the remains of an ancient catastrophe. In the heart of Siberia lies a landscape unlike anywhere else on Earth, a scar across the continent so vast that it can be seen from space. This is the Siberian Traps, one of the largest volcanic regions on the planet, and the site of one of the greatest natural disasters in Earth's history. It's not a mountain range or a crater field, but a series of ancient lava flows stretching over 1 million square miles. A region of hardened rock, frozen rivers, and barren plateaus where almost nothing grows. The name Traps comes from the Swedish word trappa, meaning stairs, a reference to the terraced layers of basalt that step across the landscape. These steps were formed around 252 million years ago when the Earth tore open and began releasing magma on a scale that defies comprehension. For nearly 1 million years, eruptions poured rivers of lava across the surface, burying forests, altering the atmosphere, and triggering a chain of events that led to the greatest extinction event in history. Scientists estimate that over 90% of all marine species and 70% of land animals vanished as a result. It's known as the Great Dying, and its fingerprints are still visible in the rocks of Siberia. Today, the region covers much of central Siberia, centered around the Tunguska and Norilsk areas. From the air, it's a maze of ridges and valleys. Black and gray stone broken by rivers that run slow and cold. The air is sharp and dry, the ground cracked by freeze and thaw. In summer, the tundra grows thin grass and moss, but the soil is poor, heavy with metals and ash. In winter, temperatures plunge below -50, and the land disappears under snow. It's an environment that feels frozen in time, where even the wind seems to move cautiously. Getting there is an expedition in itself. The Siberian Traps lie deep in the interior of Russia, hundreds of miles from the nearest large city. The industrial town of Norilsk is the closest major settlement, one of the most polluted and isolated cities in the world, reachable only by air or by river during the short summer. Beyond that, roads fade into dirt tracks that vanish into taiga and permafrost. Travelers rely on helicopters, old Soviet transport trucks, or frozen rivers to move across the terrain. Many areas are completely uninhabited, and rescue is days away if anything goes wrong. Scientists have long been drawn to the Siberian Traps, not just for their size, but for their story. The lava fields here preserve a geological record of catastrophe, layer upon layer of solidified basalt that tell how the planet once came close to total collapse. The eruptions released vast quantities of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and methane into the atmosphere. Acid rain stripped vegetation, global temperatures spiked, and the oceans turned anoxic, depleted of oxygen. Fossil evidence shows that nearly every ecosystem on Earth was disrupted. The event reset life itself, paving the way for the rise of new species millions of years later. The scale of the volcanic system is almost incomprehensible. In some places, the rock layers are more than 3 miles thick. What were once molten rivers now form cliffs hundreds of feet tall. The rock glows faintly in sunlight, streaked with red iron and green copper deposits. Erosion has carved strange shapes into the basalt. Pillars, arches, and valleys that look like the remains of ancient fortresses. The land feels both alien and immense, a monument to something far beyond human timescales. Few people live anywhere near this region. The climate and soil make agriculture nearly impossible, and the remoteness keeps all but the most determined explorers away. The Evenki people, a small indigenous group of herders and hunters, inhabit parts of the surrounding taiga, moving with the seasons and relying on reindeer for food and transport. Their oral traditions speak of great fires from the earth and skies that glowed red, memories perhaps of later volcanic or meteor events that echo the ancient destruction buried below. The Siberian Traps have also drawn attention for another mystery, the Tunguska event of 1908. Though it occurred on the edges of the region, the massive explosion flattened 800 square miles of forest and was initially thought to be volcanic. Later evidence pointed to a meteor or comet airburst, but the coincidence of location keeps it tied to the legend of Siberia's violent geology. Some scientists even suggest that smaller volcanic vents, still active deep underground, could one day awaken again, though on a far smaller scale. Reaching the heart of the Siberian Traps requires traversing wilderness few people ever see. Expeditions typically start from Krasnoyarsk or Norilsk and move by helicopter or riverboat, following the Yenisei River northward. The journey reveals how immense Siberia truly is. Endless forest giving way to bare stone and tundra, rivers winding through cliffs of black rock. The sound of civilization fades completely. At night, under clear skies, the northern lights ripple across the horizon, reflected in the frozen rivers below. Geologically, the area is still alive. Deep beneath the basalt layers, molten rock continues to shift, and some sections of ground release small plumes of gas and heat. In the 20th century, mining operations discovered massive nickel and copper deposits formed by ancient volcanic activity. Norilsk, now one of the largest mining centers in the world, owes its existence to the Siberian Traps, though its presence is a stark contrast to the untouched wilderness beyond. Pollution from the city often drifts across the tundra, staining the snow gray. Yet just a few hundred miles farther, the landscape returns to its primordial stillness. For geologists, this region is key to understanding how planetary systems fail and recover. Rock samples from the traps show changes in magnetism, chemistry, and fossil content across the extinction boundary. They record in physical form how Earth's environment spiraled out of balance and how it slowly stabilized again. Standing there, surrounded by ancient lava fields, the scale of that history is hard to absorb. Every cliff, every layer represents thousands of years of eruption and recovery. No tourist infrastructure exists here. There are no guided tours, no roads, and few photographs taken from the ground. Much of what we know comes from satellite images and research expeditions that camp for weeks in near constant daylight or total darkness. The remoteness and the severity of the climate make fieldwork a rare opportunity, and a dangerous one. Helicopter engines freeze, compasses fail, and storms roll across the plateau with little warning. But for those who make it, the reward is a glimpse into one of the planet's oldest wounds, preserved almost exactly as it formed. The Siberian Traps are less a place to visit than a record to study. A reminder of the forces that shaped the planet long before humanity appeared. It's a silent expanse that holds evidence of both creation and destruction, locked in stone. And still, beyond these volcanic steps, another hidden world waits. one carved not by fire, but by water, threading through the Himalayas in one of the deepest gorges on Earth. Tucked deep in the Himalayas of southeastern Tibet lies the Yarlung Tsangpo Gorge, a colossal canyon carved by one of the world's highest and most powerful rivers. It begins near the foot of Mount Kailash, where the Yarlung Tsangpo River flows eastward across the plateau before veering sharply south around the towering peak of Namcha Barwa. Here, the river drops more than 8,000 feet through a series of bends and cliffs, slicing its way through one of the steepest landscapes on Earth. From the rim to the riverbed, the gorge is deeper than the Grand Canyon, though few people have ever seen it in person. The Yarlung Tsangpo has always been a river of mystery. For centuries, its exact course through the mountains was unknown, hidden by the terrain and shrouded in cloud. Early explorers who mapped the Himalayas in the 19th century believed the Tsangpo disappeared into the earth before re-emerging in India as the Brahmaputra. It wasn't until the 1920s that this was confirmed, after a series of dangerous expeditions followed the river's path through its final descent. Even today, few outsiders have made the full journey through the gorge. The geography is so extreme that entire stretches remain unvisited and unmapped at ground level. The scale of the gorge is difficult to imagine. On either side, the mountains rise to more than 25,000 feet, their peaks wrapped in snow and cloud. Between them, the river plunges through dense forest and narrow rock chasms, dropping faster than almost any other major river in the world. The sound of it is constant, a roar that echoes through the valley like distant thunder. The air is thick and wet, carrying mist from the falls. During the monsoon, the river swells into a torrent that can strip entire slopes of vegetation and send walls of water crashing downstream. Because of its isolation, the Yarlung Tsangpo Gorge remains one of the least explored major landforms on Earth. The surrounding terrain makes access nearly impossible. Landslides, avalanches, and sudden floods block every route. The few trails that exist wind precariously across cliffs and disappear into jungle. Helicopters struggle to navigate the narrow spaces between peaks, and the weather can change from clear to impassable in minutes. Even satellites often have difficulty capturing clear images due to the region's constant fog. For much of the year, the gorge feels sealed off, a closed world within the mountains. In the lower reaches, where the air grows warmer, the landscape changes dramatically. The upper slopes are barren and icy, but as the river drops, the environment transforms into thick, temperate forest. Orchids and rhododendrons cling to the cliffs, and ferns carpet the floor. This collision of alpine and tropical climates creates an extraordinary range of life. Botanists have recorded species found nowhere else, from rare medicinal plants to insects adapted to the constant mist. Yet studying them is difficult. The combination of altitude, humidity, and remoteness makes prolonged research nearly impossible. The gorge also holds deep spiritual significance. For Tibetans, the Yarlung Tsangpo is more than a river. It's a sacred force. The valley surrounding it is said to be the cradle of Tibetan civilization, the site of ancient kingdoms and hidden sanctuaries known as Bayol. These hidden valleys were believed to be places of refuge, opened only to those seeking enlightenment. The area around Namcha Barwa, often called the Shining Mountain, is especially revered. Local legends describe it as the home of deities, who guard the gateway between the physical and spiritual worlds. Modern explorers have long been drawn to the gorge's mystery. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, a series of international expeditions attempted to navigate the river by kayak. They faced near vertical drops, whirlpools the size of buildings, and currents strong enough to crush boats against the rock. Several expeditions ended in tragedy. Others were forced to turn back. The river is often called the Everest of whitewater, a challenge so extreme that only a handful of attempts have ever been made. In 2002, a team led by American kayaker Scott Lindgren successfully descended the upper section, but stopped short of the main gorge, calling it unrunnable. Even today, no one has completed a full descent of its most dangerous stretch. Scientists, meanwhile, have focused on the gorge's unique geology. The Yarlung Tsangpo Gorge marks the point where the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates collide, pushing the Himalayas upward. This collision created some of the planet's highest peaks, and it continues to reshape the landscape today. The river's course through these mountains offers clues about how rivers can cut through rising terrain, a puzzle that has fascinated geologists for decades. In some ways, the gorge acts as a window into the forces that build continents. Despite its significance, few people live near the gorge. The settlements that exist are small and scattered, connected by rough trails that hug the mountainsides. The residents farm small plots of land, raising barley and yaks in the upper regions, and tending fruit orchards in the lower valleys where the climate softens. Their homes are built from stone and wood, designed to withstand the constant rain and shifting ground. Supplies are brought in by pack animals or carried by hand. For them, isolation is not a novelty. It's a way of life. The difficulty of reaching the Yarlung Tsangpo Gorge has preserved its wilderness, but also limited its understanding. China has studied the area intermittently, both for scientific and hydroelectric purposes. There have been proposals to harness the river's enormous power. A single dam here could produce more electricity than any on Earth. But the combination of geography, politics, and environmental risk has so far kept those plans theoretical. For now, the gorge remains untouched, its vast energy still confined to the river's descent. Those who have glimpsed it describe a landscape that feels almost prehistoric. The light is diffused by cloud and mist, giving the cliffs a soft blue-gray hue. Waterfalls drop from the heights in thin white threads that vanish before reaching the river below. Birds of prey circle in the updrafts, their calls echoing faintly through the canyon. At night, the sound of the river fills everything, drowning out even the wind. It's an environment that seems indifferent to human presence, immense, self-contained, and unreachable. Few places combine so many extremes in such a small space: altitude and depth, ice and jungle, myth and science. The Yarlung Tsangpo Gorge is more than just the deepest canyon in the world. It's a geological crossroads, a cultural landmark, and one of the last truly wild places left on Earth. Far to the east, though, beyond these Himalayan walls, lies another valley, smaller, warmer, and hidden for centuries behind peaks and monsoon clouds. It's a place once thought to be a myth, a pocket of rainforest high above the roof of the world. Hidden behind the snow peaks of southeastern Tibet, Motuo County sits in a basin of deep green surrounded by mountains that reach higher than 15,000 feet. For centuries, no road led there. Maps marked it as a blank patch of forest and rivers, sealed off from the rest of the world by landslides, glaciers, and storms. Even now, after the first permanent road was completed in 2013, the route remains unpredictable, closed for weeks each year as rockfalls and floods erase entire sections overnight. Descending into Motuo is like moving through time. From the frozen Tibetan plateau, the terrain drops rapidly through layers of climate. The air grows warm and wet, the light softens, and the white of snow gives way to the thick green of rainforest. Within a few hours, the landscape changes from icy ridgelines to bamboo groves, from alpine wind to the buzz of cicadas. The county lies within a subtropical valley fed by the Yarlung Tsangpo River, before it becomes the Brahmaputra farther south. For a region often described as the roof of the world, this pocket of warmth feels almost impossible. The forest here is dense and ancient. Giant ferns grow taller than people. Orchids bloom on tree trunks slick with moss. The ground is never dry. Rain falls nearly every day, filling the air with mist. The mountainsides are so steep that villages cling to them like terraces, their wooden houses built on stilts above the mud. Each morning, clouds drift low over the canopy before lifting to reveal narrow trails cut into the slopes. Rivers snake through canyons, their water the color of steel. The constant sound of running water and insects gives the place a kind of quiet rhythm that doesn't exist anywhere else in Tibet. Motuo has long held a special place in Tibetan culture. Ancient Buddhist texts describe it as a Bayul, a hidden valley of peace, created by Guru Rinpoche, the monk who brought Buddhism to Tibet in the 8th century. Bayul were said to be sanctuaries that would reveal themselves only to the faithful during times of suffering or chaos. Among them, Motuo was considered the greatest, a paradise hidden behind impassable mountains. For centuries, pilgrims tried to reach it, traveling for weeks through snow and jungle. Many never returned. Those who did spoke of a land of eternal spring, filled with rivers and life. The reality, though still remarkable, is less mythic and more geographical. Motuo's isolation has preserved one of the most intact ecosystems in Asia. The region's climate, trapped between cold mountains and monsoon winds, supports hundreds of species found nowhere else on Earth. Tigers, clouded leopards, and black bears roam its lower forests, while snow leopards move through the peaks above. Scientists call it a biological corridor, linking the ecosystems of the Himalayas with those of Southeast Asia. Its biodiversity rivals that of the Amazon, yet far fewer studies have ever been conducted here. The isolation that protects it also makes it fragile. Landslides, heavy rainfall, and earthquakes make infrastructure difficult to maintain. Even with a road, travel within Motuo is slow and unpredictable. During the rainy season, rivers swell, and bridges are often swept away. Supply trucks rely on convoys and local guides to navigate the narrow passes. In winter, avalanches cut off the higher villages entirely. For the few thousand residents who live here, isolation is not a novelty, it's part of daily life. The population is small and diverse, a mix of Tibetan, Loba, and Mompa communities who farm small terraces of rice and maize. Many villages are self-sufficient, growing food and raising livestock for trade with neighboring valleys when the weather allows. The people move in rhythm with the land, planting before the rains, harvesting before the roads wash out. Electricity and cell service reach only parts of the region, and communication is often by radio. For the outside world, updates from Motuo are rare. The first official attempts to reach Motuo were made in the 1950s, when surveyors from China tried to chart a route through the mountains. They faced constant setbacks. Bridges collapsed, rock slides buried equipment, and rainfall destroyed entire camps. Later, in the 1990s, an early road project was completed only to be abandoned a few years later after heavy monsoons erased it. When engineers finally finished the tunnel linking Motuo to the rest of Tibet in 2013, it was hailed as a major achievement, the final county in China to be connected by road, but even that route remains vulnerable. Drivers who've made the journey describe stretches of it as narrow and crumbling, the edge dropping hundreds of feet into ravines. Travel at night is discouraged, and after heavy rain, the road often disappears completely under mud. For researchers, Motuo's inaccessibility has been both a frustration and a blessing. The lack of large-scale development means its forests remain largely intact, offering a rare look at how Himalayan ecosystems function without human interference. Botanists have cataloged plants with potential medicinal uses. Zoologists have confirmed the presence of rare primates and big cats. Yet each expedition requires weeks of planning, permissions, and supplies. Helicopters can only land in clearings when weather allows, and the valley's thick fog often grounds them. Many scientific teams rely on porters and horses to transport equipment over the passes. The religious significance of Motuo continues to shape how it's seen. Pilgrims still travel there, following routes marked by prayer flags and stone cairns. The journey is considered an act of devotion, part endurance, part meditation. Along the trails, monasteries offer shelter and food, their bells echoing through the forest. Even for those who are not religious, there's a sense that this valley holds something rare, a kind of continuity with the past that modern Tibet has lost elsewhere. The remoteness of Motuo also plays a geopolitical role. It sits close to the border with India's Arunachal Pradesh, an area claimed by both countries. The difficult terrain acts as a natural barrier, but the proximity has led to military presence on nearby ridges. Patrols pass through the mountains above the valley, yet the interior remains quiet, untouched by the border disputes beyond its peaks. Travelers who've reached Motuo often describe the contrast between the journey and the arrival. The road there is harsh and unpredictable, yet the valley itself feels calm. Warm rain falls through the trees, and the rivers run slow and heavy. At night, lights from scattered houses reflect on the water, and the mountains disappear into darkness. The air carries the smell of earth and wood smoke. It's not paradise in the mythical sense, but it's something close to it, a rare place where isolation still defines existence. Much of what makes Motuo remarkable can't be captured by data or maps. It's one of the few remaining regions where both nature and culture have survived untouched. The valley's seclusion has kept its traditions alive and its forests intact. While modern Tibet continues to change rapidly, Motuo remains suspended between worlds, connected, but only barely. Beyond these green slopes, however, the mountains open again into another extreme. High above the forests and the rivers, past the snowline and thin air, sits a settlement where survival depends entirely on altitude. High in the Peruvian Andes, at nearly 17,000 feet above sea level, stands a town that seems almost impossible. La Rinconada is the highest permanent settlement on Earth, perched on a barren slope near the foot of a glacier. The air here is so thin that newcomers struggle to breathe, and the ground beneath the town is frozen rock and ice. To the west, the mountains drop away into deep valleys. To the east, the peaks stretch higher still, their summits disappearing into permanent cloud. Everything about the place feels extreme: the altitude, the cold, and the way people have adapted to survive in a place few would willingly choose to live. The town began as a mining camp. Gold was discovered in the surrounding mountains centuries ago, but the real rush started in the 1960s, when large numbers of workers began moving here despite the altitude and lack of infrastructure. Over the years, La Rinconada grew without planning or government support. Houses were built from tin and wood, stacked on steep slopes and connected by narrow dirt paths. Today, an estimated 30,000 to 40,000 people live here, though no official census has ever confirmed the number. There are no paved roads, no running water, and no sewage system. Waste seeps into the ground, freezing in the permafrost. When the wind picks up, the air carries both the sharp metallic scent of mining and the faint chemical tang of mercury used to process the ore. Reaching La Rinconada is as difficult as living there. The nearest major town, Juliaca, lies nearly 100 miles away. From there, a winding road climbs through thin air, switchbacking past mountain passes that stay snow-covered most of the year. Trucks loaded with supplies and machinery crawl upward, their engines straining in the low oxygen. The final stretch is unpaved, a steep and rutted track that can take hours to navigate. For much of the year, snow and mud block the route entirely. Travelers who make the trip describe arriving lightheaded and exhausted, the cold settling in as soon as they step out of the vehicle. Even walking a short distance feels like running a marathon. Life here revolves around the mines. Most residents work extracting ore from tunnels carved deep into the mountains. Conditions are harsh and unregulated. No safety equipment, long shifts, and constant exposure to mercury. Workers operate under a system known as the kakureo. For 30 days, they work without pay, and on the 31st, they're allowed to take home whatever gold they can find. It's a gamble that keeps the economy moving but offers little security. Many miners never strike it rich, yet few leave. The promise of discovery keeps them digging, even as the mountains erode and the glaciers shrink above them. At this altitude, the environment is unforgiving. Temperatures drop below freezing every night, even in summer. The sun burns fiercely during the day, and the thin atmosphere offers little protection from ultraviolet radiation. The town itself, clings to the mountainside, its roofs glinting under the high-altitude light. Streets are muddy in the warmer months and solid ice in the coldest. Water must be melted from snow or carried from streams fed by the glacier, though contamination from mining runoff makes it risky to drink. Oxygen levels are roughly half what they are at sea level, and the effects are immediate: headaches, nausea, fatigue. Long-term residents develop chronic mountain sickness, their bodies producing more red blood cells to compensate for the lack of oxygen, thickening the blood and straining the heart. Despite these challenges, La Rinconada remains a functioning community. Markets sell food brought up from lower valleys, and small shops line the dirt roads. There are schools, though classes are often irregular, and a few small churches that serve as gathering places. Electricity comes from diesel generators, and power outages are common. The air smells of smoke, fuel, and ice, a mix that defines daily life at the top of the world. On clear nights, the sky glows with more stars than most people will ever see, unpolluted by city lights, the Milky Way stretching across the horizon. The human element here is what makes the town so remarkable. People come from across Peru and neighboring Bolivia, drawn by the hope of fortune and the freedom that isolation brings. Many miners live alone, sending money home to families in distant cities. Others have built new lives here, raising children in the thin air. It's a community defined by endurance, not prosperity. Researchers have occasionally visited La Rinconada to study how the human body copes with extreme altitude. Few other places provide such a natural laboratory for understanding long-term adaptation. Locals show physiological changes unseen elsewhere: thicker blood, larger lungs, and a tolerance for hypoxia that surprises doctors. Scientists also monitor the glacier that looms above the town, part of the Calcaya ice cap system, one of the fastest retreating in the Andes. As it shrinks, it threatens both water supplies and the mines that depend on it. For visitors, the most striking thing about La Rinconada isn't just its height, but its contrast. At nearly 17,000 feet, there's no vegetation, no trees, and little color beyond gray rock and the faded metal of roofs. Yet the streets are alive with movement. Vendors selling food from carts, miners carrying sacks of ore, and children running through alleys in bright sweaters. It's a patchwork of survival built against every natural limit. The altitude affects everything. Boiling water takes longer, cooking is inconsistent, and fuel burns unpredictably. Engines sputter, and even basic machinery wears out faster. Trucks and generators run day and night to keep the town functioning, their noise echoing across the valley. The air is so dry that it cracks wood and skin, yet damp enough for melting snow to freeze in sheets overnight. Few outsiders stay for long. The combination of physical strain, pollution, and isolation drives most visitors away after a few days. For those who remain, leaving is just as difficult, not only because of the geography, but because life elsewhere seems impossible after so many years in the mountains. In a way, La Rinconada has its own gravity. Once you've adapted to its pace and its oxygen, descending to lower altitudes can make you sick. Environmental agencies have raised concerns about the future of the town. The unregulated mining has left the surrounding soil poisoned with mercury and heavy metals, and the glacier that sustains it is steadily retreating. Cleanup would be almost impossible at this altitude, and relocation is unlikely. For most residents, there's nowhere else to go. The mountain that gives them work also holds them captive. Still, the town endures. It exists at the edge of human habitability, proof of how far people can push into places never meant for settlement. A functioning society balanced between survival and collapse, high above the clouds. And further north, where the cold meets the sea, lies another settlement defined by isolation. A coastal community built against a frozen wilderness, where the Arctic wind shapes every part of life. Along Greenland's remote eastern coast, where the ice sheet meets the Arctic Ocean, sits one of the most isolated towns in the world. Ittoqqortoormiit is home to just a few hundred people, a cluster of brightly colored houses perched above a frozen bay, surrounded by cliffs and sea ice. For most of the year, it's unreachable by sea, cut off from the world by drifting ice that blocks the fjords. Even in summer, when the pack ice retreats, ships can reach it only for a few short weeks. The settlement lies near the mouth of Scoresby Sound, the largest fjord system on Earth. From the air, the region looks empty, mountains rising from ice-choked inlets, glaciers spilling down to the water, and endless stretches of white broken only by dark patches of rock. The town itself is a tiny pocket of life against that expanse, one of the last places where traditional Inuit hunting culture remains central to survival. Founded in 1925 by Danish explorer Einar Mikkelsen, the town was established to secure Danish presence on Greenland's uninhabited east coast. Families were relocated from western Greenland and the nearby Ammassalik area to populate the new settlement. The location was chosen for its access to rich hunting grounds, seals, polar bears, musk oxen, and narwhals. Nearly a century later, the community still depends on those resources. Reaching the town is no small feat. The nearest airport is in Nærlerit Inat, about 25 miles away, reachable only by helicopter or snowmobile when weather allows. Flights arrive a few times a week from Iceland or Greenland's west coast, often delayed by fog or storms. From there, travelers cross a frozen landscape of ridges and sea ice to reach the settlement. There are no roads leading in or out. When winter comes, which it does quickly, the sea freezes solid and the town is sealed off for months. Supplies must be flown in, and fuel and goods are stockpiled during the short summer window when ships can dock. The environment surrounding the town is raw and vast. Winter temperatures drop to -40, and winds sweep across the fjords with relentless force. The sun disappears for nearly 2 months, replaced by the faint glow of twilight and the shifting green ribbons of the aurora. The cold is absolute. Breath freezes in the air, and every step crunches across snow and ice. During this time, travel happens by dog sled, a practice still essential to daily life. The sound of sled dogs barking and chains rattling is one of the few noises that breaks the stillness. In summer, the landscape transforms. Icebergs drift through the fjords, catching the sunlight and glowing blue against the dark water. Arctic flowers bloom briefly across the tundra, and the cliffs echo with the cries of seabirds. Hunters set out in boats to catch seals and fish, while families gather berries on the slopes. The air is crisp but alive with motion, the meltwater running down from the glaciers, the calls of birds, and the creak of ice shifting with the tide. Inside the town, life follows a rhythm shaped entirely by the seasons. There's a small school, a grocery store, and a single hotel used mostly by scientists and adventurers. The houses, painted red, blue, and yellow, stand close together against the cold. Electricity comes from diesel generators, and internet service is limited. People rely on one another for nearly everything: food, transport, and company. The population hovers around 350, though numbers fluctuate as younger generations leave for larger towns or for Nuuk, Greenland's capital, thousands of miles away. Hunting remains central to the community's identity, both as a means of survival and as a connection to tradition. Polar bear hunts are permitted under strict quotas, and seals are still used for food, clothing, and fuel. Every part of the animal is put to use: skin for clothing, blubber for oil, bones for tools. Fishing supplements the diet, though the sea ice often dictates when and how far boats can travel. For many, the work is both a necessity and a way of preserving culture in a world that's changing around them. Scientists visit for various reasons. The region's extreme climate and untouched landscapes make it a natural laboratory for studying Arctic ecosystems and climate change. The nearby Scoresby Sound and the Greenland Sea host some of the purest waters on Earth, and the surrounding glaciers are key indicators of the planet's warming trend. Researchers track sea ice movement, study wildlife populations, and monitor atmospheric conditions from small field stations scattered across the area. There's also a quiet sense of isolation that defines this place. The vastness of the surrounding ice fields makes the town feel like a speck in a frozen ocean. On clear nights, the stars stretch endlessly across the sky, and the only movement comes from the northern lights rippling above the mountains. The sound of the wind against the houses becomes a kind of background music, a constant reminder of where you are. Despite its remoteness, the town occasionally draws travelers, photographers, scientists, and adventure tourists who come to see a place that still lives at the pace of nature. They arrive by ship or small plane, stay briefly, and leave before the weather turns. Locals greet them warmly, though there's an understanding that life here isn't meant for visitors. It's a place built on endurance, not spectacle. The community faces challenges familiar to many Arctic settlements: shrinking ice, unpredictable seasons, and the difficulty of maintaining traditions in a changing climate. The hunting routes that have sustained generations are becoming less reliable as the ice freezes later and melts earlier each year. Yet, for now, life continues as it has for decades, tied to the rhythm of the sea and the shifting ice. What's striking isn't just its isolation, but how completely it embodies adaptation. It's one of the few places left where modern life and traditional survival coexist on equal terms. The people here have learned to live within the limits of the Arctic rather than against them, building warmth from scarcity, stability from uncertainty. The surrounding landscape reinforces that feeling of endurance. Beyond the town, cliffs rise hundreds of feet above the fjord, their faces streaked with ice. Seals rest on floes below, and occasionally a polar bear can be seen wandering along the shore. The light, especially during the long Arctic twilight, feels diffused and endless. Every surface reflects some shade of blue, gray, or white. It's a world of extremes, frozen, vast, and quietly alive. Even in a country defined by isolation, Ittoqqortoormiit stands apart. Its location, its climate, and its way of life make it one of the last true frontiers of human settlement. Few places capture what it means to live on the edge of the habitable world, quite like this small town on Greenland's eastern coast. Yet even here, among the ice and silence, there's still another level of isolation waiting farther south, a volcanic island in the middle of the Atlantic, surrounded by storms and almost entirely unreachable for most of the year. Far south in the Atlantic, almost equidistant between the coasts of Africa and Antarctica, lies a volcanic island so remote that it's often called the loneliest place on Earth. Bouvet Island sits adrift in the Southern Ocean, a frozen speck of rock and ice surrounded by some of the roughest seas on the planet. It belongs to Norway, but it's closer to nowhere than anywhere, over 1,000 miles from the nearest inhabited land. The island measures just 23 square miles, most of it buried under a glacier. Sheer cliffs ring the coastline, rising straight out of the ocean and leaving almost no safe landing sites. From a distance, it looks like a fortress of ice, a pale dome with black volcanic ridges breaking through the snow. Winds tear across it year-round, and the surrounding seas churn with constant storms. Even in the best weather, getting ashore is a challenge few have attempted. Bouvet was first spotted in 1739 by French explorer Jean-Baptiste Charles Bouvet de Lozier, who recorded it during a voyage in search of new trade routes. For decades afterward, no one could find it again. Miscalculations of longitude placed it in the wrong part of the ocean, and sailors debated whether it existed at all. It wasn't until 1808 that a British whaler rediscovered it. And even then, no one managed to land. The cliffs, shifting ice, and violent surf made approach nearly impossible. It took until 1927 for a Norwegian expedition to finally reach the island, plant a flag, and claim it as sovereign territory. Today, Bouvet Island is uninhabited, a nature reserve managed by Norway, visited only by occasional scientists and a handful of government expeditions. Access requires special permission, and even with it, landings are risky. Most visitors arrive by ship from Cape Town, a journey of nearly 1,600 miles through unpredictable seas. The approach is treacherous. Walls of fog can appear without warning, and icebergs drift near the shore. Helicopters are often the only way to reach the island itself, setting down on the narrow coastal shelf known as Nuroisa, one of the few flat areas not swallowed by glacier or sea. Those who've stood there describe a place unlike any other. The ground crunches underfoot, a mix of volcanic gravel and frozen ash. The air smells of salt and sulfur, and the wind never stops. A constant roar that drowns out conversation. Temperatures hover around freezing even in summer, and the horizon is often hidden behind a wall of cloud. The landscape is monochrome: black rock, white ice, gray sky. Only the occasional flash of movement breaks the stillness. A penguin colony near the shore, or a group of seals sprawled across the ice. The island's volcanic core is still active, though not violently. Heat from underground vents melts patches of ice, creating steam that rises faintly from cracks in the surface. Scientists have collected samples of microbial life that thrive in these extremes, studying them to understand how life might exist in similar environments elsewhere, on Mars, or beneath the frozen oceans of Jupiter's moons. In many ways, Bouvet Island feels like a natural laboratory for other worlds, isolated, cold, and almost completely lifeless. The weather is relentless. Gales can reach over 100 miles per hour, and snowfall can bury equipment overnight. Ships that anchor nearby often find themselves driven off course by sudden storms. In 1964, a British research team reported spotting an abandoned lifeboat on the island's western shore, with no sign of its crew. The mystery of where it came from and what happened to its occupants has never been solved. The island's only permanent structure is a small automated weather station maintained by Norway. It measures temperature, wind, and atmospheric conditions year-round, transmitting data by satellite. Occasionally, teams are sent to repair or upgrade it, but these missions depend entirely on calm seas and luck. A single storm can delay operations for weeks. When researchers do manage to land, they stay only briefly, long enough to collect samples, perform maintenance, and leave before conditions worsen. Bouvet's isolation has made it the subject of speculation and fascination. In 1979, a U.S. satellite detected a mysterious double flash in the South Atlantic near the island, a pattern consistent with a nuclear explosion. The event, known as the Vale incident, has never been conclusively explained. Some suspected a secret weapons test by South Africa or Israel. Others suggested a meteor or equipment malfunction. Whatever caused it, the coincidence of location added to Bouvet's reputation as a place where strange things happen unseen. For all its mystery, the island remains an important site for wildlife. Thousands of seabirds nest on its cliffs, including petrels and skuas, while seals and penguins use the beaches to breed. Because human activity is almost non-existent, Bouvet serves as a refuge for species that have disappeared elsewhere. The surrounding waters are rich with krill, supporting the wider Antarctic food chain. Norwegian authorities strictly regulate any activity near the island, banning tourism and fishing to preserve its fragile ecosystem. In practical terms, there is little reason for anyone to visit Bouvet. There are no resources to exploit, no harbors to anchor in, and no shelter from the weather. Yet it continues to draw interest precisely because it represents the edge of what's possible. Few places remind us so clearly of the planet's extremes. A small piece of land surrounded by 360 degrees of ocean, perpetually frozen and unreachable for most of the year. Even from space, it looks solitary, a lone dot adrift in a storm-colored sea. It's one of the few places left on Earth where human presence feels temporary, where nature still operates entirely on its own terms. Further north, however, there's another isolated landscape, not surrounded by ocean but carved from stone and covered in forests, a place where cliffs and waterfalls form a natural labyrinth hidden deep within China's interior. In central China's Hunan province lies a landscape that seems designed to test the limits of imagination. Wulingyuan is a vast region of sandstone pillars, deep ravines, and forest-covered cliffs stretching across nearly 150 square miles. More than 3,000 stone spires rise straight from the ground here, many over 1,000 feet tall, their tops shrouded in mist. To stand among them is to feel enclosed by stone walls that reach toward the clouds, a natural labyrinth carved over millions of years. The pillars were shaped by time, water, and gravity. Rain and wind eroded the quartz sandstone until only the hardest sections remained, creating the vertical towers that now dominate the region. Each formation has its own character, some thin as needles, others broad like fortresses. Many are capped with trees, small patches of green clinging to bare rock. In the mornings, mist gathers in the valleys, drifting through the pillars like smoke. When it lifts, sunlight floods the stone in shades of red and gold. Wulingyuan sits near the city of Zhangjiajie, but its terrain keeps it largely wild. 4 main areas make up the UNESCO World Heritage Site: Zhangjiajie National Forest Park, Suokshi Valley, Tianzi Mountain, and the smaller Yangjiaji Scenic Area. The region is threaded with rivers and waterfalls, caves, and natural bridges that stretch between the peaks. The air is humid, heavy with the smell of wet vegetation, and the sound of water echoes constantly, from streams hidden in the forest to falls plunging hundreds of feet into unseen pools below. Access to the area is easier now than it once was, though much of it remains untouched. Visitors arrive by train or plane to Zhangjiajie, then travel by narrow mountain roads that twist through tunnels and along cliffs. Inside the park, hiking trails and cableways wind through the formations, but many towers are still unreachable. Local guides say that even after decades of exploration, there are valleys and caves that remain unexplored, accessible only to climbers or scientists with specialized equipment. For centuries, Wulingyuan existed mostly in local legend. Ancient poems describe stone soldiers guarding the clouds and mountains that reach the heavens. The Tujia and Miao people, who have lived in the area for generations, saw the formations as sacred, the homes of mountain spirits and ancestors. Even today, many of the pillars bear names drawn from folklore: Heavenly Pillar, Emperor's Throne, Golden Whip Stream. The scale of the landscape invites myth. It's difficult to walk here without feeling that something larger than time itself has shaped it. Modern recognition came in the late 20th century, when Chinese geologists and photographers began documenting the region's unique structure. In 1992, UNESCO designated it a World Heritage Site for its geological and ecological significance. The announcement drew scientists and travelers from around the world, but despite its fame, much of Wulingyuan remains rugged and inaccessible. Some areas can only be reached by steep stairways carved into the rock, while others are protected entirely to preserve the fragile vegetation that grows on the cliffs. The local wildlife has adapted to this vertical world. Troops of macaques move along ledges with ease, and eagles circle the higher peaks, using the rising air currents to soar above the pillars. The forests below are dense with ferns, bamboo, and broadleaf trees, sheltering hundreds of bird and insect species. In spring, wildflowers spread across the slopes, painting them with patches of color that fade quickly as mist returns. In winter, frost clings to the rocks, and the waterfalls freeze mid-air, turning the valley into a silent sculpture. The combination of geology and climate makes Wulingyuan one of the most visually striking places on Earth. The thin pillars rising through fog inspired artists and filmmakers alike, most famously the floating Hallelujah Mountains in Avatar. Despite the cinematic exposure, the reality of the landscape feels quieter. In person, the towers aren't otherworldly. They're immense and weathered, their surfaces marked by centuries of rain. The sense of awe comes not from fantasy, but from endurance. Climbing here is difficult. The sandstone is brittle, and the weather changes quickly. Sudden downpours can flood trails or trigger small landslides. Local authorities restrict climbing in many areas for safety and preservation, allowing access only to trained professionals conducting surveys or rescue drills. For the average visitor, the experience comes through walking, narrow paths that wind through bamboo groves, over suspension bridges, and along the bases of cliffs that disappear into fog overhead. Beyond its beauty, Wulingyuan holds scientific importance. Geologists study the region to understand how climate and water can sculpt landscapes over immense periods of time. The formation process here is still active. Rainfall continues to erode the pillars, slowly reshaping them even now. Some towers collapse without warning, while others rise sharper as sediment washes away. The park's mixture of limestone caves, sandstone pillars, and quartz peaks offers a rare look at multiple geological systems interacting in one place. Culturally, the site has become a symbol of China's natural heritage. Efforts to balance tourism with conservation have led to strict environmental controls. Only electric buses and cable cars are allowed inside the main zones, and visitor numbers are capped during peak seasons. Outside the park, small villages still follow traditional life. Terraced farms on lower slopes, markets selling local tea and herbs, and families who've lived alongside the stone towers for generations. Their houses overlook the same landscape that has drawn emperors, poets, and scientists for centuries. At dawn, the park feels timeless. Fog rolls through the valleys, muffling sound and hiding everything beyond a few hundred feet. Then, as the sun rises, the mist begins to thin, revealing the pillars one by one. The sight is slow and quiet, a natural unveiling that repeats every morning. By midday, the light hardens, casting long shadows and showing the full scale of the terrain. The cliffs look endless, each peak distinct yet part of the same formation. Despite its growing popularity, large parts of Wulingyuan remain as they have always been, remote, untouched, and protected by their own inaccessibility. It's a reminder that even in a country as vast and densely populated as China, there are still places that feel far removed from modern life, places where nature has been allowed to keep its hold. Beyond China's sandstone peaks, the cold returns. Far across the northern tundra sits a settlement shaped entirely by its climate, a place where the temperature falls lower than anywhere else inhabited on Earth, and survival depends on learning to live with the cold rather than fighting against it. In the far reaches of northeastern Siberia, surrounded by mountains and forest, lies a village where winter never truly ends. Oymyakon, a small settlement in Russia's Sakha Republic, is known as the coldest inhabited place on Earth. Here, temperatures routinely drop below -60, and the ground beneath the town has been frozen solid for tens of thousands of years. The cold defines everything: the rhythm of life, the shape of the land, and even the way time seems to move. The village sits in a valley along the Ittoqqortoormiit River, about 600 miles northeast of Yakutsk, the regional capital. The surrounding mountains trap dense, frigid air during the winter, turning the area into a natural cold sink. For weeks at a time, the sun barely rises above the horizon, and daylight lasts just a few hours. When the temperature hits its lowest, even the moisture in breath freezes instantly, falling as a fine frost. Car engines must be kept running through the night. Water is drawn from frozen rivers, and metal burns skin on contact. Despite the extremes, around 500 people live in Oymyakon year-round. Most are of Yakut descent, descendants of reindeer herders and hunters who settled the region centuries ago. Their homes are built from thick logs and insulated with layers of sawdust and felt. Inside, wood stoves burn constantly, fueled by endless supplies of birch from the surrounding forest. Outside, smoke drifts across streets lined with frost, and the only sound is the crunch of snow under boots. Oymyakon wasn't always intended as a permanent settlement. In the 1920s, it began as a stopover for reindeer herders, who use the valley's thermal spring, one of the few that remains unfrozen even in winter. The name itself means the unfrozen patch of water. Over time, the site grew into a village, serving as a base for nearby mining and geological expeditions. Its record-setting temperatures, however, soon became its defining feature. In 1933, Soviet meteorologists recorded -89.9 here, the lowest temperature ever measured outside Antarctica. That record still stands. Reaching Oymyakon is not easy. There are no direct flights and no rail connections. Travelers must first reach Yakutsk, one of the world's coldest cities, and then drive along the Kolyma Highway, better known as the Road of Bones. The name comes from its grim history. It was built during the Stalin era by prisoners of the Gulag system, many of whom died in the process. The road stretches for more than 800 miles through frozen taiga, tundra, and mountain passes. In winter, it's navigable only by trucks, fitted with special tires and heating systems. In summer, melting permafrost turns sections into deep mud, swallowing vehicles whole. The journey takes 2 or 3 days, often through temperatures that can destroy equipment and freeze fuel lines. Drivers keep engines running at every stop, knowing that restarting them might be impossible. Along the way, abandoned villages and rusted machinery mark the remnants of Soviet-era industry, relics of a time when the government tried to populate even the coldest corners of Siberia. Life in Oymyakon has adapted to the extremes. Cars are stored in heated garages or left idling 24 hours a day. Pipes cannot carry running water, so every household relies on ice blocks cut from rivers and melted indoors. Toilets are outdoor wooden sheds, their seats lined with fabric to keep skin from freezing. Food is simple and calorie-dense. Fish, reindeer meat, and horse meat, all eaten frozen or boiled. Fresh produce is rare. Supplies must be flown in or driven across hundreds of miles of ice. Yet despite the hardship, residents say the community endures because of its predictability. The cold is constant, the weather patterns familiar, and people have learned how to work with them. School only closes when temperatures drop below -60, which still happens most winters. Children walk to class in layers of fur, their faces wrapped until only their eyes are visible. The air is so dry that clothes never feel damp, even at these temperatures. The atmosphere of the place is unlike anywhere else. The cold dampens sound. Even dogs barking or axes chopping seem distant. The landscape glitters in perpetual frost, trees coated in white ice from top to bottom. The sky stays pale blue or gray, and the horizon is a blur of snow and smoke from chimneys. It's a world of subdued color and slow motion, where survival feels more like adaptation than resistance. Visitors who make it here often find themselves struck by how normal life seems, despite the conditions. There's a small shop, a post office, and a school. People still gather to share meals, trade supplies, and celebrate holidays. In winter, when darkness covers most of the day, the village glows with warm orange light from windows and stoves. Electricity is generated locally, and wood is the lifeblood of the settlement, for heat, for cooking, for survival itself. For scientists, Oymyakon represents one of the most extreme examples of human resilience to cold. The permafrost beneath the town extends more than 1,000 feet deep, trapping gases, fossils, and microbial life from ancient times. Studies conducted here have provided insight into how ecosystems respond to freezing and thawing cycles, offering clues about climate change and the stability of Arctic environments. Even so, research trips are rare. Equipment fails easily, batteries die within minutes, and temperatures fluctuate unpredictably. There are stories that capture just how severe the cold can be. In one, a film crew visited to document daily life, but found their camera lenses freezing within seconds. Another tells of hunters returning after days in the wilderness, their eyelashes frozen solid and their rifles too brittle to fire. Residents have grown accustomed to these conditions, but even they measure time by the seasons of cold. The deep winter from December to February, and the lesser cold that follows in spring. During the brief summer, the temperature can rise above 70 degrees Fahrenheit, transforming the landscape completely. The snow melts into rivers and lakes, and the ground erupts with wildflowers and mosquitoes. Roads thaw, turning the permafrost into mud, and the air smells of wet soil and pine. But the respite is short-lived. By late September, frost returns, and the cycle begins again. Oymyakon remains a paradox, both inhospitable and inhabited, harsh, yet permanent. It exists because people refuse to leave it, a settlement built on routine and endurance. The cold, rather than driving them away, has become part of their identity. Signs at the edge of the village mark it as the Pole of Cold, a point of pride as much as geography. Tourists occasionally arrive in winter, drawn by the challenge of surviving a few days in the coldest town on Earth. Locals greet them with quiet amusement. For them, it's not an adventure, but a way of life. Beyond Oymyakon, the Siberian landscape stretches endlessly eastward, mountains fading into tundra, and tundra into the frozen Arctic coast. On the far edge of that coastline sits an island that marks the boundary between Asia and the Polar Sea, a place where the wind never stops and polar bears outnumber people. Off the coast of Yemen, where the Arabian Sea meets the Indian Ocean, lies a fragment of land so strange and isolated it's often described as the most alien-looking place on Earth. This is Socotra Island, the largest of a small archipelago that has drifted in solitude for millions of years. Roughly 230 miles from the Arabian Peninsula and 600 from the Horn of Africa, it's part of Yemen politically, but geographically and biologically, it belongs to nowhere else. Socotra is the kind of place that feels outside of time. The island's isolation has turned it into a living museum of evolution. Around a third of its plant species are found nowhere else, the result of more than 20 million years of separation from the mainland. Its landscapes shift abruptly. Limestone plateaus drop into canyons, dunes stretch for miles toward turquoise sea, and jagged mountains rise from desert plains. The air smells of salt and resin, the wind dry and constant, carrying sand through narrow wadis that cut across the island like veins. The first sight of Socotra from the sea is striking. The coast appears barren, pale cliffs rising sharply from the water. But inland, the shapes of strange trees emerge. The most famous of them, the dragon's blood tree, looks almost like an umbrella turned inside out. Its thick canopy spreads wide and flat, providing shade for its roots and collecting water from the mist that drifts across the highlands. When cut, the tree's bark releases a deep red sap once prized in the ancient world as medicine, dye, and incense. In the Middle Ages, it was traded across the Red Sea and Mediterranean, believed to be the blood of dragons slain in myth. Socotra's other plants are equally unusual. The desert rose grows as a swollen trunk tapering to thin branches tipped with pink flowers, resembling something between coral and sculpture. Cucumber trees, bottle-shaped and leafless for most of the year, store water inside their trunks to survive the long, dry seasons. The island's flora has evolved to survive extreme heat, minimal rainfall, and isolation, conditions that would make most environments barren. Together, they create a landscape that seems less terrestrial and more like a vision from another world. For centuries, Socotra's position kept it both connected and apart. Ancient sailors along the trade routes between Egypt, India, and Arabia stopped here to gather water and resupply, but few stayed long. The island's reefs are difficult to navigate, and seasonal monsoons make approach nearly impossible for half the year. Greek geographers wrote about it in the 1st century, describing it as a land of strange trees and rare resins. Later, Arab historians called it Socotra, a name derived from Sanskrit meaning island of happiness, though for sailors caught in its storms, it was anything but. Today, around 60,000 people live on Socotra, most in small coastal villages or in Hadibo, the island's only significant town. They speak Socotri, a language distinct from Arabic, descended from the ancient South Arabian tongues once spoken across the region. Many still live traditionally, herding goats and fishing the reefs. Inland, small communities grow dates, grains, and tobacco in the shallow soils of the valleys. The rhythm of life follows the wind. The fierce southwest monsoon that arrives in summer shuts down the island completely, isolating it for months as waves make the ports unusable and dust storms sweep across the interior. Reaching Socotra is still a challenge. Regular flights from the mainland are limited, often interrupted by weather or political instability. The island's remoteness and Yemen's ongoing conflict have kept tourism minimal. A few chartered ships visit each year, but even in calm seasons, landing can be unpredictable. The combination of geography and geopolitics has kept Socotra one of the least visited places on Earth, despite its unique ecosystem and otherworldly beauty. Those who do make the journey find an environment that feels untouched by modern development. The interior highlands are covered in limestone karst formations, caves, sinkholes, and cliffs shaped by centuries of wind erosion. Some caves contain ancient inscriptions and artifacts, evidence that humans have lived here for thousands of years. Archaeologists have found remnants of Neolithic settlements and artifacts from Greek and Roman trade, showing that even at the edge of the world, Socotra played a role in the early networks of civilization. The island's isolation has protected its biodiversity, but also made it fragile. In recent decades, climate change and overgrazing have begun to alter the ecosystem. Scientists warn that without conservation efforts, many of its endemic species could disappear. The dragon's blood trees are declining, and the soil in some areas has eroded from centuries of grazing by livestock. Despite these challenges, Socotra remains one of the most biologically significant islands on the planet, a place where evolution can still be seen in motion. At night, the island transforms. The lack of light pollution makes the sky seem impossibly large. The stars spill across the horizon, mirrored by the phosphorescence in the waves. From the cliffs, the ocean glows faintly blue as plankton react to the surf. The sound of wind moves through the trees like a low hum, and the air cools enough to make the desert bearable again. For those who stay overnight, it's hard not to feel the pull of its isolation, not as emptiness, but as continuity, the same conditions that have preserved it for millennia. There's a rhythm to Socotra that outsiders quickly learn to follow. The mornings begin with the wind rising off the sea, filling the air with fine sand. By midday, heat shimmers off the plains, and the mountains cast long shadows across the valleys. The evening brings calm, fishermen returning with their catch, children playing along the shore, and the first signs of dusk when the air turns cool and still. It's not a landscape built for haste. The island moves at its own pace, unchanged by the outside world except in brief encounters. In recent years, small scientific teams and environmental groups have begun returning to study Socotra's flora and fauna. Their findings continue to surprise. New plant species, previously unknown insects, and coral reefs teeming with life. The island's reefs are some of the healthiest in the Indian Ocean, largely because of its remoteness. The combination of mountain, desert, and ocean ecosystems in such a confined space makes it an invaluable reference point for understanding how isolation shapes biodiversity. Socotra's cultural identity is as distinct as its geography. The islanders' songs, stories, and oral traditions describe a world where nature and life are inseparable. Many families still tell stories of spirits that inhabit the trees and mountains, not as superstition, but as a way of acknowledging the landscape's power. Visitors often note how the island feels inhabited not just by people, but by its own long memory. Few places combine such complete isolation with such depth of history. Socotra has outlasted empires, monsoons, and the passing of centuries with little change. Its people continue to live much as their ancestors did, shaped by wind, salt, and stone. For most of the world, it remains a name on a map, but to those who've set foot there, it's a reminder that there are still corners of Earth where time has barely moved. across the ocean from Socotra, beyond the equator and deep in the South Atlantic, another settlement clings to survival. A volcanic island home to the most remote community on the planet. In the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, more than 1,500 miles from the nearest continent, a single volcanic island rises out of the sea. This is Tristan da Cunha, the most remote inhabited place on Earth. The island sits almost exactly halfway between the southern tip of Africa and the coast of South America, surrounded by thousands of miles of open ocean. For the 250 people who live there, isolation isn't an inconvenience, it's a way of life. The first sight of Tristan da Cunha is unforgettable. After a week or more at sea, a perfect cone of green and gray appears on the horizon. It slopes climbing straight from the water to a jagged peak more than 6,700 feet high. The island is a dormant volcano, its summit often lost in cloud. There's no natural harbor, no airstrip, and no shelter from the wind that sweeps in off the Atlantic. Ships anchor offshore, and supplies, passengers, and mail are ferried to land by small boats. In rough weather, which is most of the year, landing is impossible. The only settlement, Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, sits on the island's northwest coast. A small cluster of houses, gardens, and farm plots set against the black volcanic cliffs. The air smells of salt and peat smoke, and the wind carries the constant sound of waves breaking against the rocks. The town's streets are unpaved, the houses painted in bright colors that stand out against the green fields. There's a single road, known locally as the M1, that runs a mile from one end of the village to the other. Beyond that, the terrain becomes steep and wild, crossed by streams and dotted with grazing cattle. Tristan was first discovered in 1506 by Portuguese explorer Tristan da Cunha, who named it after himself, but never landed. The first recorded landing didn't occur until a century later, and permanent settlement came much later still. In 1816, a small British garrison was established here to prevent French ships from using the island to rescue Napoleon, who was imprisoned on St. Helena to the north. When the military withdrew the following year, a handful of settlers stayed behind, men from Britain, Italy, and the Netherlands, who married women from St. Helena and Cape Town. Their descendants make up most of the island's population today. Over time, Tristan developed into a tight-knit community. The people share a handful of surnames: Glass, Swain, Green, Lavarello, Hagen, and a shared ancestry that makes them both family and neighbors. Everyone knows everyone else, and cooperation is the rule that keeps the island running. There's a single store, a post office, a pub, and a small hospital. Electricity comes from generators, and food is grown locally: potatoes, vegetables, and livestock. Fishing provides both income and sustenance, with Tristan rock lobsters exported to fund the island's limited trade. Life here is steady but challenging. Supply ships from Cape Town arrive only a few times a year, bringing mail, fuel, and essential goods. If the sea is too rough to land cargo, the ships turn back, and the islanders must wait for the next one. There are no scheduled flights. The nearest airstrip is over 1,000 miles away on St. Helena. Communication with the outside world depends on satellite internet, which is slow and unreliable. Medical emergencies require evacuation by ship or helicopter, if weather allows. Yet despite the challenges, life on Tristan da Cunha continues, much as it has for generations. The islanders run their own local government, maintain a cooperative economy, and share communal farmland. Children attend school until age 16, after which many leave to continue their studies abroad, often in the UK or South Africa. Some return, drawn by the peace and familiarity of island life. Others stay away, knowing how hard it is to come back. The landscape shapes everything here. The weather changes without warning: heavy rain, sudden wind, or fog that drifts in from the sea. The surrounding waters are some of the roughest in the world, fed by the confluence of warm and cold currents. The soil, made from volcanic ash, is fertile but thin. The island's interior remains largely unexplored, a steep plateau of moss, bogs, and cliffs that climb toward the volcano's crater. Only a few expeditions have reached the summit, and most locals rarely venture beyond the coastal plain. Tristan's wildlife thrives in its isolation. The island is a sanctuary for seabirds, including millions of albatrosses, petrels, and shearwaters. Offshore, whales migrate through the deep channels, and seals haul out on the beaches to rest. The surrounding ocean is a marine reserve, one of the largest protected areas on Earth. Scientists who visit describe the ecosystem as one of the last truly intact environments left, a rare example of nature and human settlement coexisting with minimal impact. The community has survived multiple disasters. In 1961, a volcanic eruption forced the entire population to evacuate to Britain. Many assumed they'd never return, but 2 years later, when the eruption had ended, most chose to go back. They rebuilt their homes and resumed their lives, unwilling to abandon the island despite its dangers. Their return became part of Tristan's identity, proof that this small society could endure even the most extreme circumstances. Visitors are rare, but always welcome. Those who make the voyage often describe the experience as stepping into another era. The pace of life is slow. There are no traffic lights, no noise beyond the sea and wind. Evenings are spent at the community center, where islanders gather for music, games, and conversation. Hospitality is a matter of pride. Guests are fed, sheltered, and treated like family. Tristan's isolation has also made it a place of scientific interest. Researchers study its unique ecosystem and how small populations adapt to remoteness. Geneticists have examined how generations of interrelated families maintain health despite limited diversity, while sociologists look at how such a small community organizes itself without conflict. The island operates by consensus more than law. Decisions are made collectively, and responsibility is shared. It's a model of cooperation that larger societies often find difficult to sustain. The scenery beyond the village is spectacular. Rugged cliffs drop straight into the sea, where waves crash against black rock. Inland, waterfalls cascade down from the slopes of the volcano, cutting narrow paths through the green hills. On clear days, the sky glows an intense blue, and from the highest ridges you can see the curve of the earth across the horizon. The air smells of wet grass and salt, and the constant wind carries the distant cry of seabirds. Despite its remoteness, Tristan da Cunha is not forgotten. The British government supports it as an overseas territory, and small projects continue to improve life for its residents. New communication systems, renewable energy trials, and improved shipping schedules. But modernity moves slowly here, by necessity. The island remains defined by its distance, from continents, from conflict, from the noise of the wider world. Tristan da Cunha stands as a reminder that isolation doesn't always mean disconnection. The people here have created a community that functions in balance with its environment, held together by shared effort and resilience. It's a settlement that endures not in spite of its remoteness, but because of it. Not far across the southern ocean lies another landscape born of fire, a volcanic island buried beneath ice, where the storms never stop, and the only permanent residents are the scientists who study its extremes. On the coast of Antarctica, tucked between massive glaciers and frozen seas, lies a place so barren it's often compared to the surface of Mars. The McMurdo Dry Valleys stretch for nearly 1,200 square miles across southern Victoria Land, forming one of the largest ice-free regions on the continent. Here, there is no snow cover, no trees, and almost no life. The landscape is a collection of rocky basins, sharp ridges, and frozen lakes sealed beneath thick ice. Winds can reach more than 100 miles an hour, scouring the ground until even the smallest grains of dust are polished smooth. The result is an Antarctic desert, a world of colorless stone and cold air that feels entirely separate from the planet we know. Most of Antarctica is buried under more than a mile of ice, but the dry valleys are different. The surrounding mountains block the flow of glaciers, and the katabatic winds, dense, dry air rushing down from the polar plateau, are so powerful that they vaporize snow before it can settle. The temperature rarely rises above 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and in winter, it can fall below minus 60 degrees. The humidity is lower than in the Sahara. Water exists here only as vapor, ice, or trapped brine. The soundscape is minimal, just the constant wind, the groan of ice expanding, and the occasional crack of rock shifting under thermal stress. For early explorers, the valleys were an unsettling discovery. When British scientist Thomas Griffith Taylor first reached them during Robert Falcon Scott's Terra Nova expedition in 1911, he described the region as a valley of death, a place where nothing could grow or survive. The name stuck. Yet in the decades since, scientists have found that even this desolate terrain harbors traces of life. Beneath the surface of its frozen lakes and within the soil, microorganisms persist, adapted to radiation, dryness, and cold. Their existence has made the McMurdo Dry Valleys a critical analog for studying extraterrestrial environments, particularly Mars. The valleys are divided into three main systems: Taylor, Wright, and Victoria. Each has its own distinct geography. Taylor Valley, the most studied, contains several frozen lakes, including Lake Bonney, Lake Hoare, and Lake Frixell. These lakes are covered by permanent ice sheets several feet thick, but below the ice, the water remains liquid, rich with salt and minerals. Strange ecosystems exist in that darkness. Microbial mats and colonies that live entirely without sunlight, feeding on chemical energy. The lakes never mix with the atmosphere, meaning some of their water has been sealed away for thousands of years. Lake Vida, one of the most isolated, contains brine trapped beneath nearly 70 feet of ice. It's 6 times saltier than seawater and has no contact with the air. When scientists drilled into it in the early 2000s, they found living microbes, proof that even in total isolation, life can adapt. Nearby, a glacier at the mouth of Taylor Valley seeps out iron-rich water that stains the ice a deep red. It's known as Blood Falls, and for years its color fueled speculation about hidden organisms. In reality, it's a chemical reaction, the oxidation of iron in the brine, but it's one of the most striking sights in Antarctica, a frozen waterfall that bleeds through the ice. Reaching the McMurdo Dry Valleys requires passing through the largest human settlement on the continent, McMurdo Station, a U.S. research base located on Ross Island. From there, small helicopters fly across the sea ice and drop scientists into the valleys during the short summer window between November and February. Even then, temperatures stay below freezing and conditions change without warning. The wind can reduce visibility to nothing, and storms can trap researchers in their camps for days. Every piece of equipment must be tested to survive the cold. Fuel gels, batteries die, and even plastic becomes brittle. Despite the hardship, the valleys have become one of the most important natural laboratories in the world. Researchers come from across the globe to study everything from geology and glaciology to microbiology and astrobiology. The terrain provides clues about how Earth's climate has changed over millions of years. Sediments buried beneath the ice record ancient atmospheric conditions, while the minimal water cycle helps scientists understand the limits of habitability. NASA frequently sends teams here to test rovers, drills, and life detection instruments intended for Mars missions. It's one of the few places on Earth where you can truly simulate an alien environment. Visually, the landscape feels otherworldly. The ground is bare rock and gravel, colored in shades of brown, gray, and ochre. Glacial ridges carve the horizon, and thin clouds hang motionless in the pale blue sky. The valley's dryness preserves everything. Mummified seals lie miles from the ocean, perfectly intact even after centuries. The wind alone seems to move, shaping drifts of dust into low waves that shift and reform. When the sun circles low on the horizon during the Antarctic summer, shadows stretch for miles, and the light turns the ice and rock to gold. There are no permanent residents in the McMurdo Dry Valleys. Only small seasonal field camps where teams of scientists live for a few weeks at a time. Each camp operates as a self-contained unit, powered by generators and solar panels. Supplies arrive by helicopter or sled, and every trace of human presence is removed at the end of the season. Waste is packed out, footprints erased, and equipment dismantled. The Antarctic Treaty demands that the continent remain untouched, a policy that fits naturally with a landscape already resistant to intrusion. Even within the scientific community, the dry valleys have an aura of mystery. They're one of the few places on Earth where the environment feels truly static, where erosion happens on a geological timescale. In some areas, rocks haven't shifted in thousands of years. Snowmelt flows only for a few weeks each summer, carving temporary streams that refreeze almost instantly. At night, when the temperature drops and the wind slows, the air grows perfectly still and the silence feels total. Over the decades, expeditions have uncovered evidence of ancient lakes and riverbeds beneath the surface, suggesting that the valleys were once wetter and milder. Some scientists believe they hold answers to how Antarctica transformed from a forested continent into a frozen desert. Others see them as a preview of Earth's far future, a glimpse of what the planet might look like if global temperatures fall again. The harshness of the environment hasn't stopped curiosity. Each year, new technologies allow researchers to probe deeper into the ground and further beneath the ice. They've found bacteria surviving inside rocks, ecosystems living off trace gases, and chemical signatures that hint at unknown processes. For all its emptiness, the McMurdo Dry Valleys are alive in ways invisible to the eye. Few travelers ever see this part of Antarctica. Tourism is limited to coastal areas, and access to the valleys is restricted to protect their pristine state. Those who do visit often describe the experience as disorienting. No landmarks, no sound, and a landscape that seems immune to time. It's not beautiful in a traditional sense, but it's hypnotic in its austerity. Beyond the glaciers that frame the dry valleys lies another desert, though of an entirely different kind, a sea of sand instead of ice, stretching across China's western frontier, where the dunes swallow entire oases and wind erases the past as quickly as it's uncovered. Across the western reaches of China, surrounded by the snow-capped Tian Shan and Kunlun mountains, lies a vast expanse of shifting sand and silence, the Taklamakan Desert. It's one of the largest and driest deserts in the world, a landscape so extreme that ancient travelers gave it a name that still carries a warning. In local Uyghur, Taklamakan is often said to mean, "Go in and you won't come out." For centuries, it has been both a barrier and a mystery, a place that swallows roads, erases cities, and hides traces of lost civilizations beneath its dunes. The desert stretches across more than 130,000 square miles in China's Xinjiang region, covering the heart of the Tarim Basin. From above, it looks like an ocean frozen midwave, sand ridges rolling for hundreds of miles, shaped by relentless wind. The dunes can rise more than 900 feet, constantly moving and reshaping the horizon. Temperatures in summer climb above 120 degrees Fahrenheit, while winter nights plunge below zero. Rain is almost non-existent. Some areas go decades without a single measurable drop. Despite its harshness, the Taklamakan wasn't always lifeless. Thousands of years ago, rivers flowing from the surrounding mountains created green corridors around its edge. These narrow strips of land became the lifeline of the ancient Silk Road, the trade route that once linked China to the Middle East and Europe. Merchants and caravans skirted the desert's perimeter, traveling from oasis to oasis, places like Khotan, Nia, and Lulan, where water, shelter, and markets offered brief safety before the next stretch of emptiness. Many of those oases still exist, but others have long since been consumed by sand. The interior of the Taklamakan remains largely uninhabited, The shifting dunes make navigation almost impossible, and the constant wind erases tracks within minutes. Even modern expeditions struggle to cross it. Scientists estimate that less than 1% of its surface has ever been explored on foot. In recent years, satellite imagery has revealed buried riverbeds and faint outlines of ancient settlements long lost to history. Archaeologists working at the edges of the desert have uncovered remarkably preserved artifacts, wooden houses, textiles, scrolls, and mummies dating back more than 2,000 years, their preservation owed to the dry air and the lack of decay. One of the most significant discoveries came in the early 20th century when Swedish explorer Sven Hedin ventured deep into the Taklamakan in search of the lost city of Lulan. His team battled sandstorms, dehydration, and exhaustion before finally uncovering the ruins near the desert's eastern edge. An ancient trading city that had flourished when the Silk Road was active, then disappeared as rivers changed course and the sands advanced. Since then, dozens of other sites have been found, each offering glimpses into a vanished world that once thrived where now only dunes remain. The desert's isolation also makes it one of the quietest places on Earth. There is no vegetation to break the wind, no wildlife beyond a few hardy insects and reptiles. The sand itself seems to absorb sound, muffling even footsteps. Travelers describe the experience as disorienting, the sense that time has slowed or stopped entirely. The sun dominates the sky, unfiltered by clouds, bleaching color from the world until everything blends into a spectrum of gold and white. Reaching the Taklamakan is easier than it once was, but still difficult. Highways now cross parts of the desert, engineered to withstand shifting dunes. The Taklamakan Desert Highway, built in the 1990s, runs 330 miles across the interior, connecting the northern and southern rims of the Tarim Basin. The road itself is an engineering feat. Crews must constantly maintain it, clearing sand and reinforcing dunes with woven straw mats and desert shrubs to keep it from being reclaimed. Even with modern infrastructure, long stretches remain empty, with gas stations and rest stops spaced hundreds of miles apart. The people who live near the Taklamakan's edges, mostly Uyghur and Tajik communities, have adapted to its extremes. Their towns are built around oases, where underground water still flows. Crops like cotton, melons, and wheat grow along the desert's fringes, nourished by irrigation canals fed by glacial melt from the distant mountains. The rhythm of life follows the availability of water. Beyond those green bands, however, the sand begins almost abruptly, and nothing can survive for long. The desert's conditions have created an environment valuable to scientists studying climate history. Beneath the dunes, layers of sediment hold records of ancient monsoons, droughts, and temperature shifts stretching back tens of thousands of years. Research teams from China and abroad use core samples to trace how the region's climate changed over millennia, how rivers dried up, and how the expanding desert reshaped human migration routes. Some evidence suggests that fluctuations in rainfall and river flow may have driven the rise and fall of entire Silk Road civilizations. There's also a growing interest in how the Taklamakan compares to other planetary deserts. NASA scientists have conducted experiments here to test rover systems and sensors meant for Mars. The sand's composition and the near-total absence of moisture make it an ideal analog. Under the right conditions, bright light, dry wind, and total silence, the landscape looks almost extraterrestrial. It's easy to understand why early explorers described it as a sea of death. Yet the Taklamakan has its moments of life and movement. When rare storms sweep through, the rain brings short-lived color to the edges of the desert. Seeds buried in the sand for years sprout briefly before the heat returns. Migratory birds pass overhead during certain seasons, following ancient routes along the Tarim River. And after sunset, when the temperature drops rapidly, the dunes glow pale under the starlight, their curves outlined by moon shadows. The desert feels endless then, still and enormous, stretching in every direction until sky and sand become indistinguishable. For the few who venture deep inside, the desert's unpredictability remains its greatest danger. Winds shift without warning, dunes collapse, and compasses can fail near deposits of iron-rich rock. Even with satellite equipment, navigation can be treacherous. Rescue, if needed, is far away. The Taklamakan is not hostile in the way of storms or predators. It's indifferent, a place where survival depends entirely on preparation and luck. Despite this, curiosity continues to draw researchers, travelers, and filmmakers to its edges. Every new expedition uncovers something: an ancient road, a forgotten settlement, or a relic preserved by time. Beneath its surface lies the story of how human civilization once stretched across even the most inhospitable places, leaving traces that still whisper through the sand. Along the northeastern coast of Australia, hidden behind walls of granite and rainforest, lies a wilderness that remained completely unexplored until the 21st century. Cape Melville sits on the northern edge of Queensland's Cape York Peninsula, a rugged headland of massive boulders, tropical forest, and ancient geology. The area is so remote and so difficult to access that for thousands of years, it remained isolated even from the indigenous communities who lived nearby. Its isolation has turned it into one of the most biologically unique places on the continent, a pocket of life cut off from the rest of the world for millions of years. From the air, Cape Melville looks like a fortress. The coastline is a maze of granite domes and ridges surrounded by dense green forest, broken only by pale strips of beach. Inland, the rocks rise into a plateau of boulder fields and rainforest patches, known as the Melville Range. The stones themselves are ancient, more than 1 billion years old, and piled in formations so steep and chaotic that no vehicle can cross them. The terrain is impassable, a labyrinth of granite blocks that can reach the size of houses, leaving only narrow cracks and gullies between them. The region's inaccessibility has preserved ecosystems found nowhere else. For decades, biologists suspected that the boulder fields hid something extraordinary. In 2013, a small team of Australian scientists led by Dr. Conrad Hoskin became the first to explore the plateau, using helicopters to reach the isolated rainforest above the rocks. What they found immediately confirmed their theories, species completely unknown to science, including a leaf-tailed gecko, a golden-colored skink, and a tiny frog with a call unlike any other in Australia. Genetic testing later revealed that some of these animals had been evolving independently for millions of years, relics of a time when rainforests covered far more of the continent. The rainforest itself is small, just a few square miles, but dense and untouched. Inside, the air is warm and still, filled with the sound of insects and dripping water. Moss and ferns cover every surface, and the canopy filters the sunlight into a soft green haze. The isolation has created a perfect refuge for species that disappeared elsewhere as Australia's climate dried over millennia. In that sense, Cape Melville is a living time capsule, a remnant of a much older world sealed off by stone. Getting there requires patience and precision. The Cape lies about 900 miles north of Brisbane, and the nearest small town, Cooktown, is more than 150 miles away. There are no paved roads beyond the lowlands, only rough tracks that become impassable during the wet season. Helicopter access is limited to brief weather windows, and storms off the Coral Sea can ground flights for days. Even researchers with modern equipment face risks. Sudden rain makes the rocks dangerously slippery, and the crevices between boulders can drop dozens of feet. Supplies must be carried in, and communication depends entirely on satellite radio. The indigenous people of the region, the Lama Lama and Bintiwara, have known of Cape Melville for generations. They regard it as a sacred place, not because they lived there, but because they didn't. Stories passed down describe the boulder fields as home to powerful spirits, a landscape not meant to be entered. That belief, combined with the sheer difficulty of reaching the plateau, meant that the rainforest within remained completely undisturbed until modern times. Outside the granite shield, the environment changes dramatically. Along the coast, the forest gives way to mangroves and beaches lined with driftwood. The sea here is shallow and filled with reefs, but swimming is dangerous. Saltwater crocodiles patrol the inlets, and box jellyfish drift just offshore. Inland, the lowlands are covered by savanna and open woodland, dry for much of the year and prone to wildfires. The contrast between the wet, ancient forest above and the dry, modern landscape below is stark, a division between two worlds separated by elevation and time. The climate adds another layer of isolation. From November to April, the monsoon rains transform the region into a swamp. Rivers overflow and low-lying areas vanish beneath water. The humidity reaches nearly 100%, and temperatures stay around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. During the dry season, the heat persists, but the vegetation thins and the streams dry into stagnant pools. In both extremes, the air carries the constant buzz of insects and the smell of damp earth. Cape Melville's discovery changed how scientists viewed Australia's biodiversity. Before 2013, it was assumed that most of the continent's major species had already been documented. The revelation that entirely new vertebrates existed in an area smaller than a city park stunned researchers. The Melville leaf-tailed gecko, for example, grows up to 8 inches long and has a flattened body perfectly adapted for hiding among the granite. Its mottled skin makes it nearly invisible against the rocks. The tiny boulder frog spends its entire life in the crevices, emerging only after rain. These species are so localized that they exist nowhere else. A single wildfire, storm, or disease outbreak could erase them entirely. Since that first expedition, the Cape has remained largely off-limits. Conservation efforts are ongoing, but the difficulty of access protects it more effectively than any fence or law. Few outsiders have ever set foot on the plateau, and most of what is known comes from drone surveys and short research visits. The Australian government has designated the area part of a national park, ensuring that its ecosystems remain undisturbed. Standing at the base of Cape Melville, the sense of isolation is immediate. The granite walls rise abruptly from the forest, blocking the horizon. The only movement comes from the wind shifting through the trees, or the call of a distant bird. There are no roads, no signs, and no power lines, nothing to indicate human presence. Even in a world mapped by satellite and GPS, it remains a genuine frontier. The Cape also holds geological significance. The boulders that define it were formed when ancient magma chambers cooled beneath the Earth's crust more than 1 billion years ago. Over time, erosion exposed them, creating the distinctive rounded shapes seen today. These formations are among the oldest exposed rocks in Australia, predating the continent's separation from Antarctica. For geologists, Cape Melville offers a rare glimpse into deep planetary history, as well as insight into how such landscapes influence the survival of species. The isolation that once hid Cape Melville now protects it. While other parts of the world face habitat loss and human pressure, this small pocket of wilderness endures almost unchanged. It exists beyond convenience, beyond accessibility, a reminder that parts of the planet remain wild, not because we chose to preserve them, but because we still haven't found a way to reach them. Far to the west, across continents and oceans, lies another isolated wonder. Not a rainforest sealed by stone, but a mountain that rises like a plateau above the clouds, sitting at the intersection of 3 countries and wrapped in fog, where the borders between earth and sky seem to blur. At the point where Venezuela, Brazil, and Guyana meet, a vast plateau rises straight out of the jungle, a mountain so abrupt and otherworldly that early explorers thought it might be the edge of the world. Mount Roraima is one of the most striking geological formations on the planet, a tabletop mountain that towers more than 9,000 feet above sea level and stands almost completely cut off from the land around it. Sheer cliffs rise thousands of feet on all sides, their black faces streaked with waterfalls that disappear into mist before touching the forest below. The summit, flat and shrouded in cloud, is a world of its own. Mount Roraima is part of the Guyana Shield, a collection of ancient sandstone plateaus known as tepuis, that formed over 2 billion years ago. These massive table mountains are among the oldest exposed rock formations on Earth. Over time, erosion carved away the surrounding land, leaving only the most resistant rock standing as isolated towers. Roraima is the largest and most accessible of them, though accessible is a relative term. Its steep cliffs and unpredictable weather have kept it isolated for millions of years, creating a unique ecosystem at the top. Scientists describe it as an island in the sky, a fragment of prehistoric Earth preserved above the clouds. The journey to Mount Roraima begins in Venezuela's Gran Sabana region, an expanse of open savanna and rolling hills. The approach takes travelers through small indigenous Pimon villages before reaching the base of the mountain. From there, the only way up is on foot, a multi-day trek that crosses rivers, swampy plains, and dense forest. The climb itself follows a single natural ramp on the southwestern face, known as La Rampa. It's steep and slippery, especially when rainwater cascades down from the summit, which it often does. The air grows cooler and thinner with every step, and by the time climbers reach the top, they've ascended more than 4,000 feet from the forest floor. The summit is unlike anything below. It stretches nearly 10 miles long and 5 miles wide. A plateau of black rock covered in pools, marshes, and strange formations sculpted by constant rain and wind. The surface is fractured into countless fissures and channels, with walls of stone rising between them. Water drips from every crack, collecting in shallow basins tinged with iron and algae. Some areas are smooth and glistening, others rough and sharp. The ground cut into labyrinths of natural sculpture. The constant mist gives everything a muted, silvery light. Life here has adapted in remarkable ways. The isolation has produced species found nowhere else: tiny frogs that live in rain-filled crevices, carnivorous plants that feed on insects trapped in their leaves, and rare orchids that cling to the wet rock. Many of these plants rely on rainwater alone, as there is no soil on the plateau. Instead, they root in thin layers of moss and organic debris. The animals are equally specialized, small, slow-moving, and adapted to survive in an environment where the temperature rarely rises above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists estimate that more than half of the species found here exist only on Roraima and its neighboring tepuis. For centuries, local Pamon people regarded Mount Roraima as sacred. In their mythology, it was the stump of a giant tree that once held all the fruits and vegetables of the world. When the tree was cut down, its trunk fell to the ground, creating the tepui, and releasing a great flood that shaped the surrounding landscape. Even today, many Pimon avoid climbing the mountain, viewing it as a dwelling place of spirits. The name Roraima itself is believed to mean Great Blue-Green Mountain in their language. European exploration of Roraima began in the 1800s. British explorers Robert Schomburgk and Everard M. Thurn were among the first to reach its summit in 1884. There are reports of a lost world atop the plateau, a landscape teeming with unique plants and creatures, inspired later writers, most notably Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, whose 1912 novel, The Lost World, imagined prehistoric life, surviving on an isolated plateau based on Roraima's descriptions. While dinosaurs were never found, the idea wasn't far from reality. The mountain truly is a remnant of ancient times, a self-contained ecosystem cut off from evolution's main path. Weather on the summit is unpredictable. Clouds roll in quickly, covering everything in dense fog, then clear just as suddenly to reveal panoramic views across the jungle below. Rain falls almost daily, and during the wet season, lightning storms sweep across the plateau. At night, the temperature drops sharply, and the wind can reach gale force. The remoteness means that anyone visiting must carry everything they need: food, tents, and fuel, as nothing grows large enough to burn. The rain, though constant, is the only reliable source of water. The geology of Roraima adds to its mystery. The mountain's sandstone base rests on layers of quartzite, and erosion has carved holes and tunnels deep into the plateau. Some reach down hundreds of feet, forming caves with mineral deposits and underground streams. The rock formations, shaped by wind and water over millions of years, resemble towers, bridges, and even figures. The combination of rain, time, and isolation has turned the summit into a natural sculpture garden unlike anywhere else on Earth. Modern scientific expeditions continue to study Mount Roraima's ecosystem. Biologists collect samples of moss and algae that thrive in its acidic pools, while geologists map the cave systems and sediment layers. For climatologists, the mountain offers insight into how tropical ecosystems respond to isolation and altitude. The data collected here also helps researchers understand how species might adapt to climate change and shrinking habitats elsewhere. Despite the attention, the environment remains pristine, access is limited, and the fragile summit is carefully protected. The experience of standing on Roraima's edge is hard to describe in simple terms. From the plateau, the view stretches for miles. A patchwork of clouds, forest, and distant tepui rising from the mist like islands in an ancient sea. The air is cool and clean, carrying only the sound of water running through cracks in the rock. In every direction, waterfalls plunge from the cliffs, their streams breaking into white vapor before disappearing into the canopy far below. It's a scene that feels less like discovery and more like rediscovery, as if the earth is revealing a fragment of itself untouched by time. Getting down is no easier than going up. The descent follows the same ramp, slippery with rain and worn smooth by constant use. Most expeditions take at least 6 days round trip, and every climb depends on weather that can shift in minutes. Still, hundreds of travelers attempt it each year, drawn by the same sense of wonder that brought explorers here more than a century ago. Mount Roraima remains a place defined by separation, a world cut off both physically and biologically. Its isolation has preserved it, shielding it from the changes that have transformed everything around it. It's one of the few places where the planet's past and present coexist in the same landscape. Far beyond South America, in the cold waters of the Southern Ocean, lies another world shaped by isolation, a volcanic island buried beneath ice and cloud, where the only constant is the wind and the roar of the sea. Far out in the Southern Ocean, halfway between Madagascar and Antarctica, there's an island that few people have ever seen, and even fewer have set foot on. Heard Island is one of the most remote places on Earth, a windswept volcanic landscape surrounded by roaring seas and blanketed in mist. It belongs to Australia, but lies nearly 2,500 miles from the mainland, closer to the South Pole than to any populated land. No one lives here permanently. There are no ports, no airstrips, and no buildings beyond a few abandoned research huts swallowed by snow. What makes the island remarkable is not just its remoteness, but the fact that it's alive. At its center stands Big Ben, a massive active volcano rising more than 9,000 feet above sea level and covered by glaciers. It's one of the only active volcanoes in the sub-Antarctic, and its summit, known as Mawson Peak, has erupted several times in recent decades. Satellite images often show plumes of smoke or steam drifting from its crater, visible even through the near-constant cloud cover. Below, the slopes are split by crevasses and streaked with black ash where lava has melted through the ice. Around the volcano, glaciers flow outward into the sea, calving off icebergs that drift into the gray waters of the Southern Ocean. Heard Island's environment is a collision of extremes. The temperature rarely climbs above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the weather can shift in seconds. Gale-force winds sweep across the island year-round, driven by the relentless circumpolar storm belt known as the Furious 50s. Rain, sleet, and snow often arrive together, carried by clouds that never seem to leave. The surrounding ocean is one of the roughest in the world. Waves can reach 40 feet high, and the water temperature hovers just above freezing. Approaching the island by ship means crossing seas so unpredictable that expeditions plan years in advance for a short window of relative calm. The first recorded sighting came in 1833 when British sealers stumbled across it. They described it as desolate and forbidding, but rich in wildlife. Within decades, sealing ships began visiting regularly, drawn by the island's elephant seals and fur seals. By the early 1900s, overhunting had wiped out most of the populations, leaving the island empty again. Nature eventually reclaimed it. Today, both species have returned in huge numbers, and their rookeries cover the beaches once more. Heard Island became Australian territory in 1947, when it was annexed along with nearby McDonald Island, another small volcanic outcrop. Soon after, Australia established a research base there, but it was abandoned in the 1950s when resupply proved too dangerous. Since then, visits have been rare, limited mostly to scientific expeditions that arrive every few years to study the island's geology, climate, and ecosystem. Access is tightly restricted under Australian law to preserve its untouched environment. Scientists must obtain permits and undergo quarantine procedures to prevent contamination. Even reaching the island remains a logistical challenge. It takes about 2 weeks by ship from Fremantle, Western Australia, or 10 days from South Africa. For researchers who make the journey, Heard Island offers a glimpse into a world barely changed since the last ice age. Its glaciers, which cover nearly 2/3 of the land, are retreating rapidly, making it a natural laboratory for studying climate change in real time. Meltwater streams cut across the rocky plains, revealing layers of volcanic ash that record centuries of eruptions. The island's active geology provides rare insight into how volcanic heat interacts with ice, a process similar to what scientists believe occurs beneath the frozen crusts of distant moons like Europa and Enceladus. Despite the harsh conditions, the island teems with life. The beaches are crowded with elephant seals, king penguins, and petrels. The smell of salt, seaweed, and guano fills the air. Offshore, whales feed in the cold, nutrient-rich waters, while albatrosses glide over the waves, their wings spanning more than 10 feet. Inland, the lower slopes are carpeted with moss and hardy flowering plants that cling to the thin volcanic soil. When the clouds break, the contrast between the green vegetation, white glaciers, and black rock is striking, a landscape both bleak and vibrant. At ground level, Heard Island feels vast and empty. The sound of wind dominates everything, punctuated only by the distant boom of ice breaking or waves crashing against cliffs. The beaches are littered with smooth stones and the remains of old sealers' camps, rusted tools, wooden barrels, and weathered bones half buried in sand. There are no roads, no trails, and no human structures left standing. The only signs of modern presence are the occasional footprints of scientists, or the faint outline of temporary tents left behind after a research season. In 2016, an Australian expedition returned to study the island's volcanic activity. They confirmed that Big Ben was erupting again, with fresh lava flows visible on its upper slopes. Because of the thick fog and fierce winds, they could only observe from a distance, using drones and thermal cameras to map the eruption. Even so, the data they gathered was invaluable. Few places on Earth allow direct observation of an active volcano surrounded by glaciers. Heard Island's remoteness has kept it one of the cleanest environments in the world. There's no pollution, no invasive species, and minimal human interference. The island's isolation also means that it serves as an early indicator of environmental changes. Shifts in ocean temperature, glacial retreat, and wildlife migration here often mirror trends occurring across the broader Southern Ocean. Scientists monitor these patterns to understand how the global climate is evolving. Still, visiting the island remains dangerous. Ships must anchor far offshore, and weather conditions can change so quickly that landings are often canceled. Those who make it ashore must contend with constant wetness, freezing wind, and unpredictable terrain. The lava fields are sharp and unstable, while the glaciers hide crevasses beneath thin snow. There are no rescue facilities, and communication with the outside world depends on satellite links. Most expeditions last only a few weeks before storms force an early retreat. To stand on Herd Island is to experience isolation in its purest form. The horizon is nothing but sea in every direction, and the sky feels impossibly close. The air tastes metallic, filled with salt and volcanic dust. At night, when the wind dies for a moment, the only sounds are the surf and the low calls of penguins echoing through the fog. It's a place that reminds visitors how rare true wilderness has become, and how small human presence is when faced with an environment that answers only to the forces of earth, wind, and ice. Yet, even this frozen island is not the southernmost reach of isolation. Beyond the Antarctic convergence, deeper into the coldest waters on Earth, lies a mountain no one has ever climbed, a sacred peak rising above the clouds of Bhutan, hidden among the Himalayas. In the eastern Himalayas, straddling the border between Bhutan and Tibet, rises a mountain that no one has ever stood atop. Gangkhar Puensum is the highest unclimbed peak on Earth, a summit so remote, so steep, and so revered that it remains untouched. At 24,840 feet, it towers above the surrounding ridgelines, hidden for much of the year behind layers of cloud. Its name means White Peak of the Three Spiritual Brothers, and to the people of Bhutan, it is more than a mountain. It is sacred. The range around Gangkhar Puensum is one of the least explored regions in the Himalayas. It sits deep within Bhutan's northern frontier, an area of glaciers, sheer cliffs, and uninhabited valleys that stretch toward Tibet. Few maps show it accurately. Until the 1980s, the mountain's exact height and coordinates were uncertain, leading to confusion even among surveyors. The first attempts to locate and climb it came only after modern mapping reached Bhutan. Several expeditions tried in the mid-1980s, but none succeeded. Harsh weather, poor visibility, and treacherous terrain forced them all to turn back. Not long after, Bhutan banned mountaineering altogether on peaks above 19,600 feet, declaring them spiritually protected. Since then, Gangkhar Puensum has remained closed, officially unclimbable by law and belief alike. Seen from afar, the mountain looks almost unreal. Its slopes are layered with snow and ice, streaked by avalanches that plunge thousands of feet into the valleys below. The air is thin and clear, and the scale of the landscape makes distance difficult to judge. Wind rolls over the ridges in waves, carrying fine ice crystals that shimmer in the light. When the clouds part, the summit appears for only moments before vanishing again. It's a mountain that seems to resist being known. The surrounding region is equally difficult to reach. There are no roads beyond the southern valleys, and access requires days of trekking through dense forest, across rivers, and into high-altitude passes that stay snowbound for much of the year. The few villages nearby lie far below, nestled in valleys lined with prayer flags and stone stupas. Yaks and mules carry supplies through the passes, following trails that have been used for centuries. For the people who live here, Gangkhar Puensum is not a destination. It's a presence, something to be respected, but never approached too closely. Bhutan's relationship with its mountains is unique. The country measures its success not by economic output, but by gross national happiness, a philosophy that values spiritual and environmental well-being as much as progress. In that worldview, certain peaks are believed to be the homes of protective deities. Disturbing them, whether by climbing or excavation, is seen as a disruption of balance. Gangkhar Puensum, the tallest and most remote of them all, is considered one of the holiest. Monasteries in the region still hold rituals dedicated to the spirits believed to dwell within it. The ban on climbing has turned Gangkhar Puensum into a paradox, one of the world's highest mountains, yet one of its least studied. Satellite imagery provides the only detailed view of its glaciers and ridges. From above, the terrain appears fractured, crevasses opening across ice fields, snow cornices hanging over cliffs, and ridges sharp enough to cut through the clouds. For mountaineers, it remains a symbol of the ultimate frontier, a peak that exists beyond ambition. Several teams have requested permission to climb it from the Tibetan side, but Bhutan's government has repeatedly refused, extending its restrictions indefinitely. Geologically, the mountain belongs to the Great Himalayan Range, formed by the collision of the Indian and Eurasian plates. The area is still rising, its glaciers feeding rivers that flow south through Bhutan and north into Tibet. Climate scientists monitor the region remotely, tracking glacial melt and the formation of new lakes that could one day burst and flood the valleys below. But even these studies are limited. Fieldwork at such altitude and isolation is dangerous. The weather can change in minutes, clear skies turning to whiteout conditions without warning. Winds above 20,000 feet often reach hurricane strength, and temperatures can fall below minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. For travelers who come to the foothills, the contrast between the lush lower valleys and the frozen peaks is dramatic. The forests below are thick with rhododendron, pine, and bamboo. Waterfalls crash down from cliffs, and mist rises from the rivers at dawn. Prayer flags mark the trails, their colors faded by wind but still fluttering in the thin air. Higher up, the vegetation disappears, replaced by rock and ice. The silence becomes absolute. From those upper passes, the view stretches across hundreds of miles of Himalayan ridges, an unbroken chain of peaks, some named, many not. And always, looming above them, is Gangkhar Puensum, its summit hidden in cloud. Attempts to reach the base of the mountain in recent years have been rare. In 1998, a Japanese team proposed a climb via the Tibetan side, but even that was denied. Since then, the region has seen only scientific expeditions focused on mapping and glacial observation. Helicopters are prohibited within Bhutan's mountain sanctuaries, so access remains on foot. The isolation has preserved not only the landscape, but also the culture surrounding it. Villages nearby continue to live much as they have for centuries, dependent on herding, farming, and trade along narrow mountain routes. The mountain's spiritual importance extends beyond Bhutan. In Tibetan Buddhism, the Himalayas are seen as the abode of enlightened beings, and Gangkhar Puensum is believed to embody harmony between the natural and the divine. The idea of climbing it for personal achievement runs counter to that belief. For locals, the peak's inaccessibility is not a challenge to overcome, but a reflection of its sanctity. Its unclimbed status, they say, is what keeps its power intact. On clear days, the mountain can be seen from as far as the Bumthang Valley, its upper slopes glowing gold in the morning sun. From that distance, it seems peaceful, but those who have approached closer describe an almost overwhelming scale. The cliffs rise vertically, and the snowfields hang suspended between ridges. Glacial winds sweep down the slopes, carrying a constant low hum. The air feels thinner than expected, and even breathing becomes deliberate. It's not a place for permanence, only passage. Bhutan's continued protection of Gangkhar Puensum has made it a symbol of restraint in a world obsessed with conquest. While nearly every other peak on Earth has been climbed, measured, and documented, this one remains untouched. In a sense, its mystery endures precisely because no one has stood on its summit. Its isolation, geographical, spiritual, and cultural, has kept it beyond reach, preserved in the stillness of the high Himalayas. South of the mountains, where the ice gives way to volcanic heat, lies another place that exists on the threshold between land and fire, an island formed by eruptions and reclaimed by glaciers, its caldera hidden beneath the fog of Antarctica. In the South Shetland Islands, off the coast of Antarctica, lies a place that feels like a contradiction, a volcanic island hidden inside a ring of ice. Deception Island is one of the strangest and most active locations in the polar regions, a caldera created by a massive eruption thousands of years ago. From above, it looks like a crescent of black rock and snow floating in the Southern Ocean, its center flooded by seawater. The island's defining feature, Port Foster, is a vast circular bay surrounded by cliffs and glaciers. Ships can sail directly through a narrow gap in the rim, known as Neptune's Bellows, and anchor inside what is effectively the flooded crater of a volcano. It's one of the only places on Earth where you can stand on a beach of ice and warm your hands over geothermal steam. The island's landscape is stark and otherworldly. Black volcanic sand covers the ground, streaked with patches of snow and ice. Steam rises from cracks where heat seeps up from the earth below, turning the air into a haze that smells faintly of sulfur. The temperature hovers around freezing, yet the ground in some spots is warm to the touch. Along the shoreline, the contrast is even more surreal. Icy waves lapping against beaches where the sand can scald your boots. In the distance, the jagged walls of the caldera rise steeply, their slopes streaked with frozen lava and glaciers that creep slowly toward the sea. Deception Island sits on one of the most active volcanic zones in Antarctica. Over the past 2 centuries, it has erupted several times, reshaping its surface and wiping out everything built there. In 1967, and again in 1969, major eruptions destroyed research stations belonging to the United Kingdom and Chile. Ash rained down across the bay, and rivers of mud buried equipment and buildings. Scientists were forced to evacuate, leaving behind twisted metal, collapsed huts, and half-buried machinery that still scatter the beaches today. The remains of those outposts, alongside the older ruins of a whaling station, now form an eerie museum of human persistence and retreat. Whalers were among the first to settle the island. In the early 1900s, Norwegian whaling companies used the sheltered bay as a base, establishing a processing plant known as Whalers Bay. The site operated until the 1930s, when whale populations collapsed and the industry moved north. The rusting boilers, oil tanks, and wooden buildings remain where they fell, slowly sinking into the volcanic soil. In the polar light, the remnants look frozen in time, a ghost settlement framed by ice and smoke. Even in summer, the sound of metal creaking in the wind carries across the bay. Today, Deception Island is uninhabited except for seasonal research teams and the occasional expedition crews. The British Antarctic Survey maintains a small base that operates for part of the year, focused mainly on geology, biology, and volcanology. Despite its history of eruptions, the island attracts scientists precisely because of its instability. The geothermal activity supports rare microbial ecosystems that thrive in the heat vents, and the constant interplay of fire and ice makes it a natural laboratory for studying how life might exist on other planets. The volcanic soil, though harsh, supports mosses and lichens that grow nowhere else in Antarctica. Reaching the island is difficult even by Antarctic standards. The nearest permanent station is over 100 miles away, and the waters around Neptune's bellows are notoriously treacherous. The entrance channel is less than 800 feet wide, with submerged rocks and unpredictable currents. Only small, ice-strengthened vessels can pass safely. Once inside, conditions remain unpredictable. Sudden winds, snow squalls, and drifting icebergs can trap ships in the caldera for days. For those who make it, the experience is unforgettable. The sheltered bay is eerily calm, the water dark and smooth, reflecting the volcanic cliffs like a mirror. The sound of glaciers calving into the bay echoes like distant thunder. The island's dual nature, both refuge and hazard, has long fascinated explorers. During the early 20th century, it served as a haven for Antarctic expeditions seeking shelter from storms. British explorer Ernest Shackleton anchored here in 1915 while searching for a lost ship. Later, whalers and researchers used the same safe harbor for their own operations, often unaware that they were working inside a living volcano. In geological terms, Deception Island remains active. Minor tremors are frequent, and the ground temperature in some areas can reach more than 140 degrees Fahrenheit just below the surface. Scientists regularly monitor seismic activity, as another eruption could reshape the island again without warning. The contrast of environments makes the place remarkable. Penguins nest along the black sand beaches, their colonies crowded among rusted fuel drums and whale bones. Seals haul out to rest on the warm ground, steam rising around them as snow falls overhead. When fog drifts through the caldera, it erases the horizon completely, leaving only outlines of cliffs and metal structures emerging from the mist. On clear days, the light is blinding, sunlight reflecting off the water, ice, and ash. The silence between gusts of wind feels heavy, broken only by the distant crash of surf outside the caldera walls. Deception Island's volcanic history and human relics have made it a site of both scientific and historical significance. It's now protected under the Antarctic Treaty as an area of special interest, preserving its wildlife and cultural remains. Visitors are required to follow strict guidelines to avoid disturbing the fragile terrain. Scientists studying the island's geothermal vents have found heat-loving microbes similar to those found in deep-sea volcanic systems, organisms capable of surviving in conditions previously thought impossible. These discoveries continue to inform research into the origins of life on Earth and the potential for it elsewhere in the solar system. Despite its dangers, the island's sheltered bay has become a rare stop for Antarctic tourism. Each year, a handful of expedition cruises enter the caldera, allowing travelers to step onto its black sand beaches and see the ruins up close. Many attempt the famous polar plunge in the bay's icy water, only to feel warmth rising from the volcanic sand beneath their feet. The experience captures the strange contradiction of the island: freezing air, burning ground, and the sense of standing somewhere entirely unique. The weather often decides when it's time to leave. The same winds that carried explorers here for centuries can close the passage overnight. When ships depart through Neptune's bellows, the view from the deck is unforgettable. Jagged cliffs rising on both sides, snow falling through steam, and the open ocean waiting beyond. For a moment, it's easy to understand why this island has fascinated sailors, scientists, and storytellers for more than 200 years. A place where Antarctica's frozen frontier reveals its fire. But beyond this volcanic refuge, deeper inland across the Chilean desert, lies another landscape defined by extremes, a place where rain hasn't fallen for centuries, and life clings to survival in one of the driest environments on Earth. In northern Chile, between the Andes Mountains and the Pacific coast, lies a landscape so dry and barren that it barely feels like part of Earth. The Atacama Desert stretches for nearly 600 miles, a vast expanse of salt flats, red plateaus, and stony plains. But within this desert lies a region even more extreme. Its driest core, an area where some weather stations have never recorded a single drop of rain. This is the closest thing on the planet to a natural void, a place where life nearly stops and time feels suspended. The Atacama's dry core sits high on the plateau between the Domeco and Cordillera Occidental mountain ranges. Shielded from both the Pacific and the Amazon by massive geological barriers, it receives almost no moisture from either side. The cold Humboldt Current off the coast chills the air, creating fog that clings to the shoreline but never reaches inland. Meanwhile, the Andes block humid air from the east. The result is a double rain shadow, a dead calm where clouds rarely form and blue skies dominate more than 350 days a year. From the ground, the landscape appears endless. The earth is cracked and crusted with salt, forming patterns that stretch for miles. Rocks shimmer under the heat, and the horizon wavers as if underwater. Temperatures swing dramatically, reaching over 100 degrees Fahrenheit by day and dropping close to freezing at night. The air is so thin and dry that it draws moisture directly from the skin. There's no sound of wind or wildlife, just stillness broken by the crunch of gravel beneath boots. Even the air smells faintly metallic, a reminder of the minerals buried beneath the surface. Reaching the desert's interior is a challenge in itself. The nearest city, Antofagasta, lies on the coast, more than 150 miles away. From there, Rough roads and mining routes lead inland through barren valleys toward the plateau. The journey crosses ghost towns left behind by Chile's once booming nitrate industry. Abandoned rail lines, rusting machinery, and collapsed buildings slowly sinking into the dust. As you move deeper into the desert, vegetation disappears completely. No cactus, no grass, not even lichen survives in the driest areas. For decades, scientists believed that parts of the Atacama supported no life at all. The dryness here exceeds even that of Mars's surface, making it one of the best natural analogs for extraterrestrial environments. When NASA first began searching for life on Mars in the 1970s, they tested their instruments in the Atacama's Yungay region and found almost nothing. Soil samples from the driest valleys contained no detectable microorganisms. Later research revealed traces of hardy bacteria hidden deep beneath rocks, but even these are rare and dormant most of the year. In the absence of life, the desert becomes a record of geology and climate, preserved like a fossil. Yet the Atacama is not completely lifeless. On its outer edges, where a bit more moisture reaches the soil, small oases and fog-fed ecosystems survive. In some coastal valleys, low-lying plants draw water from the Camanchaca, the thick fog that rolls in from the Pacific each morning. These patches of green, called fog oases, form a fragile transition between the sterile core and the living world beyond. Further north, in the high Andes, salt lakes host flamingos that feed on algae thriving in the mineral-rich water. But inside the driest basin, nothing moves. The only signs of change are the shifting of shadows and the cracking of salt under the sun. The desert's stillness has drawn scientists, explorers, and filmmakers for decades. Astronomers prize it for its clarity. The air here contains almost no moisture or pollution, making it one of the best places on Earth to observe the night sky. On the Chajnantor Plateau, more than 16,000 feet above sea level, the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, ALMA, operates one of the most advanced telescope systems in the world. Its antennas, arranged across the plain like a fleet of white disks, detect faint radio waves from distant galaxies, using the desert's silence as a lens into the cosmos. On clear nights, which are almost every night, the Milky Way cuts across the sky in perfect detail. The ground beneath the telescopes tells a different story. Beneath its cracked surface, the Atacama hides vast reserves of salt, copper, and lithium, minerals formed by the evaporation of ancient lakes. These resources have made the region one of the world's centers for mining, though operations remain far from the desert's lifeless core. The contrast between industrial extraction and pristine emptiness is stark. From the air, the geometric patterns of evaporation ponds and salt flats stand out against the natural landscape, like blue and white mirrors reflecting the sky. The Atacama's dryness also preserves history with uncanny precision. Artifacts left behind by ancient travelers remain almost untouched, protected by the absence of weather and decay. Petroglyphs carved into rock walls still bear sharp edges after thousands of years. Mummies from pre-Incan cultures, discovered in the desert's cemeteries, are some of the best preserved human remains ever found. Their hair, clothing, and skin survived intact because the desert never allowed bacteria or moisture to break them down. In modern times, the Atacama remains sparsely populated. A few small towns, like San Pedro de Atacama, serve as gateways for scientists and tourists. The people who live here rely on underground aquifers and water trucked in from the coast. Many work in mining or tourism, guiding visitors through canyons, geysers, and salt flats at the desert's fringe. Despite being one of the driest places on Earth, the Atacama supports a small but resilient human presence, communities adapted to scarcity and isolation. For those who travel into its heart, the desert's sensory emptiness can be overwhelming. The light is harsh, reflecting off salt and sand with blinding intensity. There is no shade, no color variation beyond red and white, and no sound beyond the occasional crack of stone expanding in the heat. At night, the transformation is equally stark. The temperature drops, and the stars dominate the sky with a clarity unmatched anywhere else on Earth. The horizon glows faintly under starlight, and even distant mountains appear sharp in the thin air. Scientists continue to study the Atacama's extreme conditions to understand the limits of life. Its soils, once thought completely sterile, have revealed microbial traces that survive in microscopic pockets of salt. These discoveries suggest that if life can exist here, in a place with virtually no water and constant ultraviolet radiation, it might also exist on other planets. The Atacama remains one of Earth's closest natural parallels to Mars, and it continues to serve as a testing ground for future exploration. Yet despite all its scientific value, the Atacama Desert's driest core is still largely unknown to the wider world. Few people venture into its interior, and fewer still stay long. It's a place defined by absence, of water, of life, of sound. But within that emptiness lies its power, a reminder that even on a planet as dynamic as Earth, there are still pockets where nothing grows and time feels suspended. If you enjoyed this journey through Earth's forgotten frontiers, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden and unexplained. Tell us in the comments which of these remote places fascinated you most, or where you'd go if you could reach the edge of the map. Thanks for watching, and as always, until next time, stay curious.